Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you are here in YouTube and you'd like to join the conversation, you have to first travel to Zoom, which you'll get in a link down below, and then you have to travel to Mukana, where you can actually ask questions and chat. But you can find that link in Zoom. So there's a little bit of a pathway there to get to. Once you get there, you can ask questions. The first hour, or really all of the hours, is really driven by the audience. This is probably the most audience-driven show ever. So it's really important for you to ask questions. The best way to do it is to think about them all day. What questions? What can't you quite figure out? What is kind of tickling your brain that you can't quite figure out why something is the way it is? This is the place to ask. We've got centuries of experience in this panel to answer your questions in all kinds of different backgrounds. And so think of those questions, bring them up, ask them. Now, if you think you can answer those questions, if you think you might have the answer for some of those questions, you see us fumbling about and you could have answered it better, you might have been able to. And you just need to get here a little earlier, 6:40 Pacific Standard Time, AM, to do a mic test, camera test, internet test. If you want to check your kit, you can come in as early as 6 o'clock, and then we'll check out all your mics and everything else and make sure that you're ready to go. And you give a little more time than right before the mic check. So that's the best way to do it. First hour is general questions, whatever you are trying to figure out. Second hour is the more vertical, something that we've decided is special, and we want to make sure that that we have a little bit more time for it. Today, we're going to be talking about QLab, and Sam Kuznets, I don't know if I said that last name correctly, is going to be joining us, and Sam is from Figure 53, and we're really excited to have him. This is going to be the best time ever to ask Sam questions. So if you want to ask those questions, make sure to put the question into Mukana. Once you've posted the question, tag it as second hour. That way we know it's for the second hour. Otherwise, it'll go into the first hour, and we'll answer it in the first hour. Okay, let's go ahead and move on. Bill, what questions do we have stacking up?
Well, the first one's going to be an interesting discussion because Schy, our friend on the panel here, has been working with Madeline Smithberg on Mad in the Kitchen. They did an insert on the Today Show yesterday. And Schy, Jeffrey Powers is asking Schy to talk through how everything went yesterday.
Well, it all started with office hours. And you each individually either encouraged me or physically got on the call when I'm trying to figure things out. We ended up at their request using 2 iPhones. Then they had screen scraped a lot of our previous shows that we had done, which are shot with a variety of different sources. But that right there is an iPhone 12 that I was manning. We did put that on sticks, and that they had called in directly to that from FaceTime. And then eventually you will see the second camera, which is an iPhone 11. Also, they called in separately. And so you'll notice in the bottom left-hand corner when you see the screen share underneath the Mad in the Kitchen. Now, this is we screen scraped this to put it on our YouTube channel, so hopefully we don't get it taken down. Yeah, there's somebody's pointing that arrow. That was put in post-production, so that's why it's overlaying inadvertently. Then again, this is all their switching that they're doing in their studio in 30 Rock, and this in the kitchen is us there in Bellevue, Washington. So the audio are earbuds, not the Pro, in Madeline's head, coming to this camera, and they are also talking to her. This is cut-in footage from previous episodes. Then as she's talking about her marriage and of after 34 years, and this is the honeymoon that they went down to Mexico. That was what Hoda and Jenna wanted to talk about. They didn't want to talk about food, didn't want to talk about David Letterman. They were interested in this woman's story, 60 years old, starting over, and they've been very exciting to.
Is there any cooking?
There actually was a salmon that we had to prepare. That we have a sous chef that's also helping Madeline as she's getting ready and being the personality. So there was the salmon that she talks about the recipe, what she did for the glaze, and there it is. She referred to that as her one artistic talent was painting, that she would not frame it, but she would throw it into the oven, and talked about and again, these anecdotes that she's just very naturally gifted at. We spent the day before doing all of the dress, the back set, the backdrops, the sets, the placement of the imagery. Unfortunately, the we're learning continually about camera placement and camera, but her husband Sam is who you're seeing here is still on a small rig, not the name, not the brand small rig, but just a thing that you put your iPhone into, and the FaceTime is a pretty horrible. We have no control at this point of the camera, and you'll see it pop in and out of focus. And so we have no management of shape or size other than physically pushing or pulling manually going into the shot. So that was the request, was they wanted close up. So Sam got that pole position. So this is the punchline here. And to all of your gracious, she then takes this out of the oven and picks it up with her hands without a mitt and promptly burns her fingers. Fortunately, no major issue. But again, anecdotally, in wanting to have fun, that really spoke to the heart of the audience. And Hoda and Jenna continued to love into the situation and said, "Let's have you back a third time." So there's that. Any questions?
Yeah. Leland?
I do have one. So you're saying there was no way you could control that autofocus feature that was taking place on the phone during that broadcast to ABC
No,
or
it's
NBC?
FaceTime. You don't have
Not-
control.
Okay.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
once you're inside the FaceTime, it controls everything.
Gotcha. Okay.
Bill?
So, Schy, there would have always been some little moment of panic, I would imagine. Did anything kind of surprise you, and did you have to react on the spot to make any changes?
We had rehearsed the night before, and Phil had gotten on, and Leland had reached out, and we had tested with, and then Bruce up in Chicago. We had tested per your checklist, team, and so we had tested everything. So in the moment, it was over in a heartbeat. And so watching it in post, I mean, what we did a watch party afterwards because it was in the East Coast and we're on the West Coast. So we got to watch it 3 hours later, and it's like this thing is forever. And it's like all of us just kind of looked like we blinked and it was over. So not that in the moment, but again, with her 30 years of experience and my 30 years of experience, and then the combination is like the show must go on, period.
Courtney?
For sound, we're using the AirPods. Are we using the mic on the phone?
AirPods by their request, and we
So-
we tried putting her. We got the Pyle with the two ears and everything, but again, that's a wired solution. Even with the Rode Go, it was just go with the simple AirPods $160
Question.
solution. Go ahead.
You have to join by FaceTime. Do they know enough to say that you have to join by FaceTime from the phone?
We set up. I gave them my full spec.
No, but I'm saying that if you appeared in FaceTime, they would
They
probably
wouldn't
just
know.
see it as FaceTime. So FaceTime on the Mac can see the ATEM switcher. So you could use FaceTime, but then you could immediately go to full on camera switching. Everything else
Pump
is
some Blackmagic cameras into that FaceTime.
yeah.
And once we establish the trust, and they give us the time to practice that, I mean, I would practice that and then offer it to them. But
But
again,
you could do it. The thing is what I would do is I wouldn't necessarily switch stuff. I would just do a camera in. So you had a real camera. I
Yes,
wouldn't start
thank you.
switching for them. I would just give them a single
No.
camera, but then you'd have control over the camera. So you could even have it be an iPhone if you wanted to into the ATEM switcher using the HDMI. So it wouldn't change anything other than you're now using Filmic Pro, then you're able to have all the controls that you want. And so it would look, the first step would look like an iPhone to them,
yeah,
except for the fact that you have more control. The second step would be it would look suddenly like really short depth of field, and it would, but you'd have to, and then suddenly it would start changing cameras, So now the other thing that I would think
Guy.
about.
This is my friend Alex. He doesn't like playing by the rules.
No, they didn't. No, I'm a lawyer's son. I'm good at playing by the rules but only by the letter. The spirit of the rules is not necessarily important to me. So but because they said you got to join by FaceTime, they just didn't say you had to join by FaceTime from that phone. Now the other thing, I'll just give you the secret of how I floated Pixel Core from scratch, like without any input, is that I showed up on TV, on Tech TV every week. And every week I would do a tip. And in that tip, I would say, oh, by the way, we didn't have enough time to go through this whole thing. But if you come to my website, I've got a 20-minute version of it with a step-by-step how-to. And in there, if you want to, when you got to that, you couldn't get it until you put your email in. Now, you don't have to do that anymore. That's not considered the way to do that anymore. But you could say, hey, if you want more so what you're missing right now is that front cell of you're letting people kind of come to the YouTube page. But if you said, if you want to do this recipe, I have it on my website, you're now using them as a vehicle to pump lots of people with but what you want is what I did is I had a 20-minute version of the same thing that they saw in 3.5 minutes, or a 15-minute version. So I have a longer version of this for those of you who couldn't keep up, or that, we didn't have enough time. And I think that they'll let you do that. I mean, they want you to be successful at doing it.
Promotions is if you had a movie, had a book or something.
You keep it really quick. Like, it's got to be 15 seconds. It's just like, even. If you want to get more, you can go to my website. I've got a longer video of it, and the recipe, all laid out for you. Now, the key, what's incumbent on your side is that it has to match it. And I want to put it in perspective is that it took me every day that I was on Tech TV. I started on Monday morning, and I worked on it all day until Wednesday at 4:00, and when I did it, so like it was 2.5 days of my life every week was me prepping it, figuring it out, reducing steps, making it easier, making it. And then what happened was I was accumulating 1,000 emails. This is not ABC. This is, or NBC or whatever. This was Tech TV, a tiny little cable network. And I was accumulating 1,000 emails a week, from of people that were interested in what I was doing. Right. And that close connection. So when I put out my Photoshop training a year later, I put it out and said, oh, it's $70, but you can buy it for 35. I made 70 grand in 1 week. Like it was, I didn't make it. It went to the company and floated the company and everything else. But the point is that, take advantage of the fact that they want you to come back. What you've done is you've sunk that hook in, that you've proven that you're a solid. They're just trying, they're a bunch. Madeline knows this better than anyone else.
Exactly.
They're a bunch of producers. They're trying to fill time. If she makes it easy for them to fill time, it's going to, that it's going to be interesting and easy and everything else, then they're going to do it. And so to your point, you don't want to go too aggressive with the cameras and everything else, because they're happy with what they got. And what you want to do is you want to leverage that quickly so that every time, because when they get out of COVID, they'll want things to be more dressed up again. So what you want to do is subtly figure out, you got to get rid of that shaky camera. You just got to it's not getting rid of the operator.
You have more reach than I do, brother.
No, it's not the operator. It's the you just need to get an Osmo, just to smooth it out.
I have one. I had a monopod. I have a tripod. I have
but it's just an Osmo. That's all.
I have one.
I know. So anyway,
you made a comment yesterday, and I'm reaching out to you now. Here it is.
So the but what I will say is that what you need to do on the next episode is have a web page that's up there, that's ready to accept people, that has a recipe, that has a video, that has a breakdown, and has skills set, because this is like weeks of work for you, just so you know. Like, what I'm talking about is to get this set up for the next one is, this is my recommendation anyway. I think that if you build a nest around this right now that people can go into for the next one and the next one and the next one and the next one, you really turn it into a launch vehicle, but it's not enough to just send them to YouTube.
And our product is on Zoom. And that's where John Iddleston has been at. Are you kidding me? Opportunity. His call out and said, do you believe the planets are aligning? And I'm going,
I know, but
absolutely. So
really get them into a place where they can watch a post video.
Yep.
They can download the recipe.
Yep.
There are step-by-steps that is not on Zoom. Like you can do
No.
things on Zoom, but you have to get that thing where people can download things and bring them back to them. And if you do that thing, you're gonna build this up to a big thing, and we get to watch it all. And that's why we're talking about it now.
And to your point, Monday night we're going to be on the NEA, National Education Association, with 100 of the presidents across the country, and they are going to be using the video that we did last week. So to your point, we're listening. Thank you.
But there
sir.
should be a post video that you produce, the post production video for every live cooking thing that you do, and people can come up and get it. And because if you do it well, you do it for the morning show, you also do it for other people live, but that video is the same one. Like that salmon video is something that could be one of the things people can have you do live. But it's for the, so you can have it be something, but they get to do it live with you and ask questions. That's what they get out of that. Anyway, just something to think about. But
thank you. No,
you should not do an appearance that doesn't bring people back to your website.
Corrected. Yes.
Anyway, that's all I'm going to say about that.
Thank you. Thank you. Well,
Phil,
we will be talking more.
We'll go real quickly. Phil, Guy, and then Leland, but like 15 seconds each, and then we'll move on.
Mike, just a quick thought. Doesn't the iPhone 12 have better image stabilization than the 11? You could just simply switch those two cameras.
Outside of FaceTime, yes. Inside FaceTime.
No.
Oh, no image stabilization?
I don't know. I
believe it just does out of the box. You might switch those two cameras just as a simple
You
fix and see if
what I
mean is
FaceTime you have.
Well,
no, what I mean is you said you had an 11, which is handheld, and you had a
Oh, I see.
12 on the sticks. And I'm saying just put those two. Yeah.
That would have been it. Yep. Good point.
the other more expensive thing to realize is that if you're used to this, and you don't want to do this, you could get a Ronin, and then it would smooth it. It'd be the same operation, but it would feel the same, except that it's super smooth. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I was just going to say, meet them where they are. So if that audience wants to see Instagram photos and close-ups and really fast, like 5 in one post, like picture video with some text, meet them there, because then you could circle them back later on and get in front of that same audience. But different people don't want to go to TikTok. Different people don't want to go to the website. So, but if you keep them in what I call the solar system, like 5 different places, eventually you can get them to the book or wherever you want to in a future date. But the important thing is just to get subscribers or get followers.
We're working
get likes.
with Al Roker's social media person, and yes, we're outputting no less than 4 different experiences to these 4 different social, what you call universes.
Yep. Go ahead, Leland.
Yeah, and just to touch on a couple of technical aspects I saw, Schy, because of the fact that Hona and Jenna were both kind of taking charge of the broadcast that you were expecting your time in, it joggled everything up for you. So you did a great recovery on that. The other thing I noticed was the audio clicking and popping that we witnessed with bad bit rates on audio. And I thought maybe it was just your end of the broadcast, but it wasn't. If you go back and watch the show again, you'll hear that same popping and cracking on Hona and Jenna's mics as well. So it's something NBC should look into. They just have some numbers jungled up on the back.
Yep. Next question.
Moving on to Michael Fisk in Spokane Valley. I have a 250 megabit per second internet account. When I run speed tests, I'm getting in the low 90s in download speeds on my M1 Mac Mini, whereas my iOS devices are giving me 250 plus. I installed a new cable modem and it's hardwired to the desktop. Michael's open to suggestions on how to improve things.
Go ahead, Jason.
I would immediately be suspect of your router. I mean, if it's that kind of an issue, I think it has to do something with quality of service. I'm going to assume that the desktop is hardwired and that the iPhone is wireless. If they're both wireless, then I am completely baffled. If it's an all-in-one, I am completely baffled. My guess is it has something to do with your router.
Mickey.
Yeah, he mentions that the Mac Mini is hardwired. That leads me to believe that probably not all 8 legs of the Ethernet cable is wired correctly, and it's running at 100 megabit connection instead of full gigabit.
Yeah, be sure you've got all the pins. If you've got just 3
he
or 4
mentions
of the pins,
it's running. He mentions it's running at 90 plus megabits. So that's with overhead, that's probably hitting the 100 megabit limit.
Yes, I think that's probably it. Jeffrey.
It's also could be the fact whatever cable internet subscriber you have, that they're just going through a lot of saturation. And if it's a shared internet, like I have Spectrum and I have a 400 download, And for the last few weeks, I've been getting anything from 400 down to 90, up and down. We even had the problem where the squirrels chewed on the lines, and we fixed that. No, still had that.
But
problem.
if you're testing it, and one thing at a moment is one number, and the other one is another number too, and it happens to be just under 100, it's probably the cable. Next question.
Moving on to David Brady in New York City, who says, shopping for affordable in-ear monitors, nothing blinged out like Gaga's, but better than my cheapo earbuds. Any recommendations for low, mid, and high price ranges?
Mickey?
Probably on the low end, I think what Guy is holding up there, which is the IE40, I believe. The Sennheiser IE40. And then on the mid range, I would probably what I'm wearing now, the Shure SE 425, which is I think around 200 or 300 US, and on the high end, maybe the A25. But yeah, what Lady Gaga is using is probably most likely the JH Audio ones that are run around anywhere from $1,500 to $3,000.
Victor?
On the lower end, the Shure SE 215 CLs for $99 are a good set of phones.
And if you're looking to use them as a phone, like if you actually want a wired connection with a microphone on your iPhone, my opinion is the Etymotic, and I think they're like the threes for the iPhone, are the highest quality microphone, and they're the most intelligible. They're not the best sounding, but they are. It's like 150. It's the one that's like 150, not the one that's 109. But it's they are the clearest for phone calls with the best microphone. And we tested a lot. We bought all of them a couple of years ago and tested them, and they're by far the easiest for other people to hear. So it depends on what you're looking for. Go ahead, Jason, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, the Shure SE846s are fantastic. I'm using them right now. Also, +1 on the Sennheisers. Those two are fantastic.
Next question.
Schy from the panel, who was just on, is asking, using FaceTime on iPhone 12, going HDMI out into a computer monitor, all we could get was the vertical image on the external computer monitor. Without extra hardware, how can I see the FaceTime as a horizontal image on the computer monitor?
Go ahead, Jason.
On the Mac, it's just Command R to use FaceTime in landscape mode. On the iPhone itself, the trick is that before you plug in to the Lightning adapter, you absolutely need to be sure that the camera has switched, and then you don't switch away from it because there's a little bit of a glitch.
And you also lock it. So you turn it sideways and then go into your things and lock your orientation. So like you can basically set up your iPhone to lock orientation to horizontal, and then it'll never turn up, never change. So that's another way to do that. Next question.
Moving on to Jim Wilson of Marblehead, Massachusetts. He says, my daughter does presentations over Zoom to local town committees. The folks running the meetings aren't always skilled at Zoom. She's asked me to help figuring out how to share her screen, sometimes slides, sometimes other software applications. What's the best way to do this as a member, not the host?
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
What kind of stuff is she showing? Because it's always the trade-off between frame rate versus resolution. And so if she's trying to show them detailed stuff, then she needs to screen share in Zoom itself. If otherwise, she can just ATEM mini or share in coming in through the camera input.
And the other thing that I had talked about in the past was that you can also use an ATEM mini. You can open QuickTime and set QuickTime to make movie, and QuickTime will, you can then screen share it because it's bezel-less. You can screen share your QuickTime into Zoom, and what that allows you to do is now you have a hardware switcher switching between your sources, and you have and it'll show up as a screen share, so it'll have the sharpness that you're looking for. And it just depends on how much you want to think about the money that you're not spending on gas to drive around to do sales things, and what you're spending on. We're no longer spending a lot of money on clothes. We're not spending and so the thing is your new way of projecting is the hardware. So having a little bit more hardware and a little bit a switcher and some inputs and so on and so forth. The easiest way to do presentations, in my opinion, is with an iPad. So an iPad with USB-C into the computer, then have, some kind of little computer that goes in, depending on what you want to do, into your ATEM Mini, and then that goes in as a input. You'll end up with you stand way head and shoulders over everybody else doing presentations. So if you're trying to win things, this is the way to, this is taking a aluminum bat to a wooden bat baseball game. So and that's the subtle things that make it easier to win. Resco.
I was going to say, the other nice thing is coming in through the ATEM Mini, you don't have that awkward moment of, hey, if they didn't set you up a screen share, hey, screen share is just kind of a dead space time to switch over.
And what happens is that when you're doing what I'm talking about, you're able to bounce back and forth. So you're able to jump between your presentation and yourself. You're able to jump between your computer and yourself. You jump between the computer and your presentation and yourself. Being able to do that and be able to do it without saying, okay, now I'm going to share my screen. Now I'm going to do this. Now I'm going to do that. And there's just that speed creates energy, and being able to do it. And so I'd highly recommend thinking about it. Next question.
Dan H. in Erie, I presume Pennsylvania, says, inspired to play with an ATEM Mini and was just wondering if anyone thinks there's an update or replacement ATEM in the near future.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I doubt it. I feel like, they released 3 in rapid succession, and their goal was to give you an ATEM Mini that could do just about everything you could need it to do, up to and including the thermal limit of the thing. Yep. So we'll see.
Roscoe.
Yeah, I think it may be that all the features that are on the ATEM Mini are going to come to their larger switchers, so they'll cost a lot more, but they will have all the features of an ATEM Mini, just at a higher price point.
Yeah, Courtney.
They usually announce new products right at NAB, which is usually in March or April. But this year it's going to be in October, I think.
Maybe.
So you might wait till then. What I think they will do is maybe add a second HDMI out on it. That's the one feature that everyone's requesting, so that you could have the aux switcher that's on the Pro that lets you switch between any of the inputs. That could go out to a second HDMI out, and it would be very useful. And then the other one would be program all the time. That's my 2 cents.
I don't think we're going to wait. I think we're going to see a lot of announcements in April, because there's huge production pipelines and sales and everything else. I think that NAB created that, and the idea of moving NAB to October is not going to really go very well, because it'll do whatever it's going to do, but they've moved it out, and all these companies are going to do something in April anyway, because that's, they planned that a year ago or 2 years ago or whatever, and so there's a wait that is going to happen. And I think we'll still see a lot of, between now and end of April, we'll still see a lot of announcements. I think that I do agree with everybody here that the chances of a Mini getting updated new is low. It's not impossible. It's Blackmagic. You never know. But I think that it would make more sense that they will update all of the other switchers that are old. So there's everything between the ATEM Mini and the Constellation, and doesn't have Teranexes on every input, or most of the switchers don't have Teranexes on every input. They don't have the new keyer. They don't have, there's a bunch of things there that don't exist. I can't imagine them letting those go long in the tooth without putting those to sleep by putting the new designs out, and then go back, and then they revisit the Minis probably in 2022. Bill?
Yeah, I just wonder if they might do something with resolution, because they're pushing their cameras higher and higher in resolution. And the Mini and the ATEM line at the low end down there is great for web. But
I think it'd be highly unlikely for the Minis to go higher than 1080p, mostly because almost nobody needs it, number one. And number two is that the amount of performance that it would be required to add graphics and do all the other things that it's doing at a higher resolution, it barely can do 1080p in this form factor. So, I think that going to 4K, and again, Zoom can, unless you have the right thing, can't even do 1080p. So I think that it's got a lot of room to go there. Next question.
Moving on, Gabriel Ung of Malaysia says, while testing screen sharing a video to Zoom, I had a better resolution and frame rate keeping the defaults as opposed to optimized for video. Optimized for video option dropped resolution to 360 and the frame rate to 12 frames per second. Has the panel tried using screen share for production into Zoom?
Yeah, I just in the last question or two talked about it, of doing screen shares of a QuickTime, to do productions into Zoom. But normally we do it you push to get the version of Zoom up higher if you're going to do real productions. I mean, you need to make the requests to get it to at least 720. And to do a production into Zoom, it's really rough to do it at 640 by 360. So it's kind of holding the whole thing back. I know that there's technical issues, but it really would explode if it wasn't. 640 by 360 is destroying events. Mickey and then Roscoe.
Yeah, I would say in terms of screen sharing, at least in my experience, it's been inconsistent and hard. It's hard to predict how it would react with certain kinds of content. Some content, it plays back okay with in terms of resolution and frame rate, but some other types of video not so good.
This is where the $100 Facebook portal comes in to make sure you're bumping up your.
If you're doing a meeting. Yeah, getting a portal or having a Zoom room if you for some reason need one, but a portal is enough. It'll guarantee your meetings are at 720, and then you can do production at 720. And we did production at 720 for a decade. I mean, 720 is definitely sufficient to do an awful lot. Next question.
Gabriel Ung is back actually from Malaysia with another one, and he's asking regarding how to grow a YouTube channel. Office Hours has streamed to YouTube daily, generating a lot of content for the channel with content-rich descriptions and titles. Why hasn't this channel exploded with subscribers, or why doesn't it appear at the top of searches? What are your thoughts?
It's audience interaction. There's almost none, and we do that on purpose because we put everything into Makana. So that's a key piece of the. So the key piece of the algorithm is looking for interactivity, so people asking questions. And so we're not doing that, and I'm fine with that. Like, I'm using it. I don't use YouTube I'm not trying to grow a YouTube channel. And we will, and we're not going to, but I don't want to do it because it's my channel right now, and I don't want to build up around that. So when we launch the new channel, we'll do more things that will increase the number of people, increase what the channel does. But I specifically am not trying to grow this one. It's used as a way to get video into Makana easily, number one. And number two is an archive for all of you. And that's the only thing I'm using it for. Go ahead, Jason.
I would just, to put it more succinctly, this channel optimizes for quality, not for attention. That's the best way I can think about it. And, whatever the next channel does is its own deal.
Again, but when you look at the math of what the algorithm does, the algorithm is looking specifically for, it's a mixture of things. One of the things that's to our advantage is the long average view time on YouTube. So it's a very long compared to most, but the thing that's going to defeat it is that no one's interacting. And so anyway, and I'm not doing anything I'm specifically not doing anything to grow it. Like it's there as a service for the viewers until I can get the new channel up. And then what I'm going to do is start posting, my own videos, other videos from people here if they want to, all these other things to build up that thing. And then this will be one of many things that are going up into the channel, and most likely it'll grow pretty fast after that. Next question.
Brant Kruger of Minneapolis, Minnesota is impressed with the quality of the Pyle PMEM1 headset mics, but I can only seem to find them in white guy beige. Any recommendations for low budget, high quality headset mics for darker skin tones?
Don't they come in black?
Not the cheaper ones.
Not the Pyles.
They're all beige. I mean, go ahead, Sam.
It's not about necessarily being available in that color, but Copic art pens can be used to color almost any kind of lavalier microphone that I've tried them on. They're inexpensive in the grand scheme, although I guess for pens, they're pretty pricey. But it's really kind of like a paintbrush pen hybrid. And that's the standard use, at least in Broadway and for national tours, theatrical tours, to color the body of the lav to match the skin tone of the actor. So you start with the brightest lav color you can find. If you can find pure white, that's actually even better. And then you just brush it down to the skin tone to match.
That's great. Next question.
Moving on to Jason Mobley. What OWC USB hubs do you all recommend? I need one large hub to serve all my needs. Currently, I'm using a Stretch and another cheaper one. I need to free up one of my... I'm sorry?
StarTech and another.
Oh, StarTech. I'm sorry, you're right. And another one. I would say not my normal display. I need to free up one of my MacBook USBs so that I can plug my ATEM in directly.
Go ahead, Jason.
OWC only. So if you actually mean hub, they only make 2 at the moment, and one of them is like barely out. It was announced at CES. If you're talking about a dock, then they make several. Jeffrey, do you have any insight here?
Well, there is one that I am using. It's called the OWC Dual Mercury Pro, and it is a two drive system plus a hub behind it. So that gives you an extra. It's USB-C, not Thunderbolt, and gives you a couple one USB-C in and 2 USB-A ins. So if you need more than that, like Ethernet and things like that, that might not be. It really depends on what you want to use it for, connection-wise.
Go ahead, Bill.
Yeah, I'm using the OWC. Let's see what. There we go. Thunderbolt 3 dock, and so it's got like 12 or 13 ports on it. They've been solid as a rock. I use one here and one in the studio out in the voice booth. So I get real fast response back and forth from things, and it seems to be as solid as a rock. I'm a big fan of OWC hardware.
Go ahead, Jason, real quick, and then we'll move on.
So when I say hub, I mean something that can actually take Thunderbolt 3 and repeat it. They only make 2 of these. This is the only one that's actually out in the physical world. Everything else is a dock. I know I'm parsing language here, but this will allow you to multiply Thunderbolt 3. The docks don't.
Next question.
I think this is 1 in and 2 out, but I might be wrong about that. So let's move on to the next question. Benjamin Adaput of San Carlos, California, and here on the panel, our friend. What are the differences between showing video content through your webcam and screen sharing, particularly in a 1080p meeting? Which is preferred?
Well, I'd say in a 1080p meeting, I would just cut into it. I mean, I wouldn't in a 1080p, unless I didn't have a tool to show screen, I wouldn't. If I was able to do it as a cut into it, I would absolutely use it that way. I wouldn't screen share. The problem you really get into over 1080p, you can screen share more than 1080p. The problem is you have people having readability issues on the far end. So you don't want to limit your text size and limit everything else in your format to 1080p, in my opinion. I don't think going higher than that makes sense. And you're just going to give up a lot of frame rate. If you have a 1080p capable meeting, you're going to get full frame rate or close to full frame rate, as well as 1080p, which is going to be the best solution, in my opinion. As soon as you switch to screen share, it will be higher resolution, and it could be potentially higher resolution, but it'll be lower frame rate almost automatically. So I would not do that if I didn't have to. You only use 10. The reason we push so hard for 1080p for this is because of the classes we're about to start doing. And if Sam stays here long enough, we'll try to persuade him to do classes with us on QLab. Anyway, but the classes that we're going to be doing with Andy and the Resolve classes we're doing, the Ripple training, I didn't want to be stuck with screen sharing. I wanted to have it be, video input. So I pushed for a 1080, that's why we pushed so hard to get 1080p on this platform. Go ahead, Benjamin.
It makes a lot of sense. What about slides?
I still would show slides. I mean, again, I would show slides through the way I show slides for this stuff. I just took my iPad out, but
yeah, you just throw it in over your.
I put them. No, I put them. I put the iPad and I connect it to the ATEM Mini, and then I can cut to it. I can cut to the slides, and then you're just on an iPad, just going like this to show the slides, and then you can cut back to yourself. You can cut to that. You can cut to other things. It's really the way to go if you can. Yeah. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, just curious what your thoughts are with this, Alex. Like, just playing the devil's advocate, like in a meeting where you have non-technical people and a lot of people just keep everything on gallery view the entire time. How do you deal with that in terms of forcing people to see you and your presentation in full screen?
Maybe spotlight. When you spotlight, it'll go full screen.
Yeah,
they have to choose to go to. Go ahead.
But yeah, in a meeting wherein like people don't even know what spotlight means.
Well, if you're the host, again, that would be the case. And if not, it's wetware development, which is telling them that, hey, you can see this full screen if you go to speaker view, and you just have to kind of tell them that's what's there. And you might even do a little slide if you're about to do it of showing where to where to click on it. Like if you go up here, you can click on speaker view, but it'll default to speaker view to start with generally. So it's they have to choose gallery if they want to, in general. Next question.
Moving on, Doug Johnson in Orem, Utah is in with, I have an event coming up where I need to put 6 video feeds on screen at once as picture-in-pictures. My Blackmagic 2 ME switcher only does 4 or 5. Any thoughts on an easy solution for that?
Go ahead, Phil. Yeah, Phil.
vMix.
You can
or
you can-
OBS.
Yeah, go ahead, Roscoe.
I was going to say, it doesn't say whether he's doing HD or 4K. If he's doing HD, I'd get some ATEM minis and put them in front.
Yeah, I mean, it's vMix will work. I mean, again, it depends on how big the event is, so that's the only thing for me. Like how much weight I'll put on a software switcher, just because of my experiences with software switchers. So, but that would be the only, my only thing there. We've done a lot of them, and I have to figure out, we do 6-ups all the time on ATEMs, and I don't know how Mauer does it, to be honest with you. Like, I know that we do 6-ups all the time, and I have to go back and find out how he's doing it. So we'll see if we can get Kevin Mauer on.
That's for the Constellation, though, isn't it?
It is, but he's not. It's with a Constellation, but the Constellation is still limited to 4 inputs. So he's doing something, and I have to figure out what that is that he's doing. But I know that we've done 6-up. We did a lot of 6-ups in the fall. So I know that we were using DVE for 5-ups, but I thought that, DVE in conjunction with, but anyway, we'll try to get back to you on that. I will say that from a design perspective, 6 is not great. It's 4 is the right number for the number of people on a screen. 6 kind of stinks, and we did probably 50 with 6 in the fall, and wasn't our choice. And every time I looked at it, I hated it. so it's just the screens are too small, I'd rather cut between people and create event things that got me to 4. But the 6 is really on the outer edge of a round table as well. I mean, we do it here, but it's hard from a broadcast perspective. Go ahead, Guy.
Now that I think about it, there was Touch Director, the guys that make an app for the ATEM Mini with the iPad. They just showed how to do this in some diagrams with their app, but you got to use a Mini in combination with the 2ME, 4ME, or the Constellation. So I'll put a link in the chat. I'll dig it up real quick.
Next question.
James Babbitt here in San Diego to Phil Lenger. Great second hour showing your work in New York yesterday. Could you please show the photo with Dick Clark and talk about the photo?
Okay, really quick. I won't tell the whole story again, but here's me doing cue cards when I shouldn't be. I'm fully unqualified to do cue cards. And here's Dick Clark, and that's me. And it was about 0 degrees Fahrenheit. There it is again. But basically, he's really, really angry at me, and I've got a goofy little happy grin, and he's really. So sometime when we're not on YouTube, I will show you the video of this.
What was the date? What year was this?
This was 1998 going into 99, and we were shooting promos for the following year because that was year 2000, and we were doing all sorts of big events then. So we were a year ahead shooting just fake. He was faking, hey, welcome to the year 2000 kind of stuff.
Right.
And he was not liking it at all.
He did not look happy in that still.
And he's, granted, he's a very nice guy. He just was mad at me.
Even in 1998, I mean, you got to remember the guy is like 150 years old,
Yeah.
he's seen
But
it
he
all.
was still on the ball. He was definitely on the ball, but it was one of the coldest New Year's Eves ever in the history. And 2, we were very rushed, and the whole cue card thing was a last minute addition to this whole promo shoot thing. And it was just, it was a bad combination of things, plus the pants fire that we talked about before. So.
Right. Right. That's great. Next question.
Our friend Halak Miguel Lopez Waterman is back in from Florida with, do you think that NBC leaves the small FaceTime window in the shot, we talked about that earlier, to keep the feeling of familiarity or homeyness, or is it just that they have not solved getting that clipped out?
I actually think that it may be that I know if we had to put things back in, And part of it is to tell the audience, this isn't one of our cameras. This is someone coming in from home on their phone. And so they did it as a way to kind of give themselves permission that the quality is not going to be as high as you would expect from a camera. And I think that's probably why they're coming in over FaceTime is kind of a, production, of course, is very snooty. I'm very snooty about it. If you ever shoot with me, I don't even like 2/3 inch chips. So I think that they're trash, so they, and so if you think about that, for them, an iPhone is like, oh, I can't believe we're doing this on broadcast TV. And so I think that they want to comment it to let the audience know so they feel better, because I think that what Schy's doing with Madeline is probably top 1% of everything they get from iPhones. And so because there's way more effort being put into it. And so the reality is a lot of it's really bad, and so people aren't putting the kind of effort in that Schy's putting in. Go ahead, Schy, and then Talak, and then Jeff.
And to NBC's credit, they're not in a building together. The producer is in her apartment, the director's in their apartment, the this and that, and this and that. And so that they are doing anything at all, I think there may be only, 3 humans in the studio, 1 in the control room, and then the 2 talent, and then everything else robotic and remote. So it's pretty Herculean, but that's a good question.
Yeah, Talak.
Early on in the pandemic world, I did not have office hours, and I was trying to figure out how to move into this whole other world in terms of theater. And I was watching broadcasts like NBC. My wife watches that particular show a lot, and I was blown away. I was like, look, they're doing it the same way we are. Mm-hmm. And then so I'm really happy to be able to ask this question, because I wondered if it was a conscious thought or not, and it sounds like maybe it is.
I think it is. Yeah, Jeffrey.
Yeah, I was also wondering if it's also an issue with anything union related for pushing out video, which is why when you started talking about using cameras pushing into a Mac using FaceTime that way, it made me wonder if they would allow that.
They don't have any control over the far end, so that wouldn't. I don't think that would affect anything. If it's them paying you to do it, yeah, absolutely. But if they're inviting you in and you're providing the video feed, they won't have any. I think that what they don't want is people getting creative and screwing up their live show. They have something that they know how to do, and they figured out a model, and they're doing, we have to remember they're doing it in front of millions of people, and so they don't want it, the stability of, or the predictability. If something goes wrong, they know what to do. If you start adding switchers and stuff, now if Schy starts doing it slowly, maybe you can persuade them to do it, on the 20th, version of it, but, or if you show them the shows that you're doing with iPhones or whatever. Anyway, that's a whole nother thing. And I'm very curious about the whole like FaceTime input into it. Yeah, anyway, that's a whole nother thing. Good, Schy.
Well, and to your point, we are doing the 2 different episodes, one for the Pacific Northwest in Portland, and we're using our full kit and streaming to them over Zoom. And then to Jason, we'll be doing a Valentine's thing in Minneapolis. And again, they are accepting of these other technologies. NBC, I'm sure, just wants, because they do so much and they're going to so many, they don't want to experiment.
It's always hard. Everyone's got a good idea, and I know that for me in production, it's always like, well, what is 99% safe? It's definitely the way you think through it a lot. Next question
comes to us from our friends at Marantha Spanish Church in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Is Audio Hijack a hardware or software base?
Audio Hijack is software for the Mac that allows you to add processing to what's coming in. So you pass it into Audio Hijack, you do a little bit of work to it, and you send it back out to your applications and make them available. And so oftentimes used with loopback, but there's no hardware to it. Roscoe, real quick, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I was just going to say, just be real careful right now. We're having a few issues with the update, but they're really on top of it. So the new M1s will work well very shortly. They work well now.
Next question.
Michael Paley in New York metro area says suggestions for interfaces connecting boom mics to ATEM minis, not going through a camera. Would like options at different price points, switcher output going to Zoom, but would prefer all the audio to come through the ATEM for local record.
Go ahead, Roscoe.
When I give you the low price option, put Shure, S-H-U-R-E, FP31 into the Google search engine. Just buy them. They're bulletproof. They work forever. Love them.
And it's an interface?
That's the old Shure. Yeah, that's the old Shure mixer.
ENG mixer.
Yeah, Mickey.
Yeah, the FP31, FP32, 33. That's where the sound devices 302s came from, and it was designed by them. Same guys for sound devices, but on the, I don't know if you would consider this low end, but like this is a phantom power supply box. So the biggest issue with feeding a shotgun mic into an ATEM is your lack of phantom power. So you need to somehow get phantom power to the microphone. So this is a box from PSC, Professional Sound Corp. I think it's around 120 US dollars. And it'll allow you to get phantom power into the microphone, and you'll need to get an XLR to mini jack cable, essentially unbalance your connection, and that will allow you to use the preamps on the ATEM. Although there is one as well from Denicky, which I like a lot more, and I prefer to use because it has a solid, it has a more solid feeling body to it, and that's just around $130, $10 difference. So I'd rather go with the one from Denicky. Stepping up from that, this is a Sound Devices MM1. It's a single channel preamp from Sound Devices. This is around, I think, 550 US. But if you step up to this, might as well go with add another $200 and get a MixPre 3.
I'd say like mid room, you can also use the zooms. There are a variety of zooms that would probably do what you needed to do, but if you wanted something that really gives you all the tools to keep growing, in the MixPre 3 version 2 would be the suggestion, Bill.
Yeah, talking about like the Sound Devices 302 as well. Similar idea to what Roscoe was saying. Like you can find secondhand 302s for around 400 to 500 US. So that's a great deal for 3 excellent preamps.
Yeah, these are those 302s and the MM1s all have limiters on them, and really good limiters that make them great. And they, I think I've probably owned 20 or 30 of the 302s. We used to use them as our little mixing interface, and I don't know how many MM1s. So they're tanks. I mean, these things are tanks. There's no software to them. I mean, there's software, but there's no software that can crash, or you have to figure out. Everything is WYSIWYG, and they are. I mean, we have taken them literally all over the world in all kinds of conditions, and they just work. Bill?
There are boxes that are dedicated to boom pole operators that put out a signal on XLR. If you're having trouble with phantom power, you can also go with something like this. This is a little $50 device that you can charge via USB, and for 3 or 4 hours, it will give you standard 48 volt phantom power down a line. It's not a permanent solution, but if you're just going out and doing hits, it works just fine.
All right, now we're going to go into speed round. Got the rest of the questions out before 8. Next question.
Brant Cougar is here from Minneapolis, Minnesota. In playing around with my Mini, I've scrounged up every rando HMI cable in my house. Does the panel have any favorite brands for cables, maybe for short run patches?
Go ahead, Jason.
Monoprice is cheap, and for the short ones, it's just fine.
I've had some issues with 4K on the Monoprice ones, but at 2K or 1080p, I haven't had any. For short runs, they work great. If you can get the old Apple ones that are 6 feet, for 6 feet ones, those are still the best ones out there. We don't know why. I don't know why, but they've just always worked, and we've never had any problems with them. But for short runs, I would say Monoprice. Yeah, next question. Oh, go ahead, Chris, real quick, and the next question.
My issue with most HDMI cables is they're really stiff, and a lot of times, I mean, if you're plugging into a light piece of equipment,
gotta go quick, gotta go fast.
And so I use this one.
Which one?
It's Passau, very thin. They lay flat on the desk. Very easy to manage by.
Great, I think that's perfect. Next question.
Gabriel Ung is back from Malaysia with doing a 4 or 5 UP design for a panel discussion. I realize putting the panelist in a vertical narrow windows is tough to keep them inside. Either they sway or they're too large or too low. What 4 or 5 up window layouts do you use or recommend?
You can do 4 next to each other, and then usually what we do is we do 4, and then we have the host as 1. So you separate the host out, and then you have the 4 is kind of how we do it, and we give them, they can still have a relatively 16:9. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, just to follow up also on that earlier question. This is the Touch Director PIP app. It's like 20 something bucks, but there's the 4-up. So you're taking two switchers. He's got a 2ME, so you can do the boxes where you can have the 4 and then the host on the left, 4 and the host on the right. And these are preloaded, pre-installed that you can pull up. But this gives you some ideas if you want to look at how other people are doing it. 4-up, bottom right.
Does Touch Director work with Companion?
That I do not know.
Okay, just curious.
Not directly with Companion, but I mean, it is its own app, so it's going to be controlling the ATEM directly, and you can use the two simultaneously.
Right.
If there's hotkeys, yeah.
Next question.
Jonas Dotel of Reulingen is talking to Phil, particularly on the panel. Do you trigger the multiple sizes of your picture-in-picture via a macro?
I do. Whoop. Sorry. I do it with my ATEM Mini. Just a button. There's a button in the ATEM software control where you run to A, run to B in the upstream key panel.
Yeah,
but you could set that. Yeah,
it's nifty. Like that. It's just right in front of you on the hardware. It's really nice. Next question.
Michael Marsh of San Anselmo says, is MKV higher quality than MP4? Can you suggest an MKV converter? Handbrake is giving very noisy outputs.
Go ahead, Jason.
Edit Ready should work if you're on a Mac. On a PC, I've always used Handbrake.
Mickey?
Yeah, MKV is just a container, so it depends exactly what codec and what bitrate you store inside that container.
Yeah, a lot of times you want to think about there's the frames themselves, and then there's those frames get packaged, and those can be H.264. Most of those are going to be packaged as H.264. So there's an H.264, but that's just a kind of a raw framework of data, and then you have to wrap it in something that is going to, when Mickey says wrapping, you got to wrap it into something that different applications know how to deal with. Rather than the raw frame. And so MKV is one, MP4, Move, those are all wrappers that just say, okay, I'm going to give you a known interface and let you interface with this correctly. Go ahead, Leland.
I left a link in the chat for a cloud converter app that's available for just that purpose.
Great. All right. We are switching gears on time, which I was a little, at first I thought we didn't have enough questions, and then I thought maybe we might have too many. So you never know. And so a lot of us have been using QLab for a while now. For me, it really switched over, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago when, a lot of us were using Playback Pro. Playback Pro was having, some issues keeping up with the operating system. And so we started looking for other things, and we dug in. I think I started for me in Africa, actually. There was someone using QLab and in Kigali, Rwanda, and I had never seen it before. So I started playing with it, and of course, it was a lot more than what Playback Pro was. There was a lot more to it. And so we started using it more and more. And then here it's become, something that a lot of folks here are using. And so we thought we would do a special hour, and Lawrence was kind enough to talk to Sam. Now, and Sam Kuznets are you the founder of?
Oh, no. Chris Ashworth is the founder of Figure 53.
Right.
Which is the company that makes QLab, and he started creating QLab after being asked actually by friends of his who said, we have access to a bunch of used Macs from an education context, but we don't have any software to run our show, and we need to get a show up.
Right.
I got brought on about 8 years ago now, originally to help support the release of QLab 3, and then I helped shepherd the release of QLab 4, and now I work as education and writing the documentation for QLab 4, but I'm certainly not the founder.
And what's your background? Well, how did you end up working on QLab?
I got started in theater when I was in middle school, actually. I was, I got hooked into school plays, first as an actor, and then I discovered backstage work where I really felt like I was at home. And my father was a career broadcast journalism producer. He worked for NBC for decades. So I've always sort of been adjacent to the field. I was working in theater all through high school, all through college, professionally after college, and I became one of the early advocates for QLab because I was one of the people who understood that the deep distrust of computer hardware in live production was because people were using Windows, which was a stability catastrophe throughout the 90s and early 2000s. And when QLab appeared, I already knew that Macs were rock solid and dependable. And when QLab appeared, I became a big advocate for it. And that's how I ended up getting hooked in, because when they decided it was time to expand, they saw me involving myself in the user community as vocally as I could.
Right.
And I got brought on.
And so, and then the development of, you kind of shepherded the development to version 4. What were the big changes that happened between 3 and 4?
So with the release of QLab 3, we really became established in the audio community in professional theater, at least in the United States and in Great Britain, as sort of what folks used. We, just as you were saying with Playback Pro having a hard time with, I'm not trying to talk out of school. Mm-hmm. Playback Pro encountered difficulties at the exact same moment that we coincidentally encountered solutions. And that same thing happened in theater with SFX, which was the standard audio playback software in the 90s, late 90s and early 2000s. So when QLab 3 came along, it was at that right moment, and we became established in professional audio. With QLab 4, we took a big step forward in our video production capabilities. The flexibility of video output in QLab 4 is much greater. The hardware requirements went up, but what you could do with that increased hardware requirement expanded. And we also added ArtNet and DMX lighting control in QLab 4. So those were sort of the big things that we changed.
That's great. What do you think really distinguishes QLab? What makes it different from other similar products?
For me, the fact that QLab is not a timeline-based tool, although it has timeline-based aspects that are available to users, I think is what makes QLab valuable. Because any of us who work in live events know that no matter how well you script it, the truth is that the exact duration of each moment of your production cannot be 100% predicted. And those of you who work in television broadcast, you move much tighter than we do in theater. In theater, the flexibility of time is in fact an asset and not a liability. And so a timeline-based tool in theater is a restriction. We know that the sequence of events is completely rigid, but the duration of events is not. And QLab is designed to accommodate that idea that we know what the next event will be non-negotiably, but we don't know exactly when it comes. And so the human who's participating in this process in theater, it's a stage manager and a QLab operator working together. We understand that those people are the people who dictate the timing. And QLab allows that timing to stay fluid and stay flexible without sacrificing precision.
And I just want to say that for us, it was life-changing this fall when we moved to QLab we had a lot of virtual events. We were doing 3 to 5 a week. And these are pretty big events in front of a lot of people. And, we were struggling with the playback because there was so much playback to do. And there were so many ways that it needed to be done. And there was just no way to do it with our hardware. And we started using QLab. And I know that for us, it got down to, it's a space bar. Like it's the next thing that has to happen. But when it happens is dependent because there's conversations going on. There's 3 people talking. Okay, now let's go to, let's jump to Utah, and boom, we hit a button and it would go, and it was just, now there was a lot of setup work and a lot of other bits and pieces to get it all working, but it allowed us to build very, very refined looking shows that we just couldn't do inside of the Blackmagic hardware. Like we were used to using HyperDecks and used to using things like that and planning it. And it just got to a point where that wasn't going to be sufficient, and the flexibility, because we could work on it with the client up until 10 minutes before the event, like working out cues and doing all that stuff. And then we'd lock it, go, and you have the show, and so it was really, really, really powerful. And that made us a believer.
Yeah. Because I have very limited experience in the professional television broadcast world or in the cinema production world, I think of things through the lens of theatrical production. And it has tools that are available. The idea of the cue being an event that comes next, just as you described, is a very powerful tool when it comes to actually presenting your story.
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're going to jump into questions. I know you probably have some stuff to show us too, but we'll cut through some questions. If you've got questions for Sam, this is the time to ask those. If general questions will probably go into tomorrow or whatever, but if you have questions for Sam, throw them in right now into Makana, and we're going to go through them right now. Bill, what do we got?
Our own Victor from the panel is in first today with, please talk about the lighting module features of QLab. You just mentioned ArtNet.
Absolutely. So QLab is free at base. There is a relatively large set of features that are free to use permanently and forever. And if that's all that works, all that you need for your show, please just use those free features forever. And for lighting, we allow you to patch 16 addresses. If you add a lighting license, you can patch as many DMX or ArtNet addresses as your computer is capable of handling. I myself have never tried more than 1 1/2 universes worth of lighting in QLab, but I know folks have tried it. I know it can be done. In short, QLab's lighting module takes the QLab queuing paradigm, which which audio and video people presumably are already familiar with, and applies it to lighting. So the idea is that each individual queue is an event that operates in a linear fashion, although you, the human, can jump around as you like. And each queue updates DMX output state for all of your patched lights. So if you're using ArtNet hardware, QLab outputs over a network. It technically works over Wi-Fi, but I cannot possibly encourage you thoroughly enough to use Ethernet for really any situation that you can. Wires are good, wires are cheap, and wires can
we talk about that a lot.
Only break. You can tell when they break. You can look at it and say, look, that wire is broken. So there's a window in QLab called the light dashboard, which is the live state. You can manually manipulate your live state, capture the changes to queues. QLab uses what we call sparse queues, which means that by default, each queue only contains updates to the channels that you update. So in a sense, that's how we provide tracking. And at the moment, QLab's lighting module exists at a level of complexity that I describe as analogous to the ETC Express line. I'm a big fan of ETC. And the Express line of consoles is sort of where we aimed to match our feature set. And we are slowly building our way upward from there. The most recent addition was Submasters, which allows proportional control of channels, and a graphical lighting picker for both RGB plus color mixers and CMY color mixers. And we still really view ourselves as at the beginning of QLab's lighting journey. And we're excited to continue to expand the feature set over time.
All right, go ahead, Victor.
As a follow-up, how do you guys handle the less expensive Asian type LED fixtures that are out there today in your generic profile? Does it do a pretty good job of being able to configure those?
Yeah, I find that by and large, with the notable exception of Varilight and Roby, who are over here in their own crazy world doing crazy things that I admire, pretty much everybody else uses a fairly predictable layout of DMX attributes. And so we've packaged a handful of generic profiles that you can use to apply to your fixtures, but we also will make fixture profiles to order at any time. So if you write to us, support@figure53.com, and send us ideally the PDF manual of your fixture or a link to download the manual, or even just if you can't find that, just the name. We'll figure it out. We'll make a profile and we'll send it on back to you, and then include that in a future release. I've been working on on lighting fixture profiles personally, and when QLab 5 launches, we will break the number 1,000 for a number of included profile. It's actually 3,000 profiles, but for about 1,000 fixture types. So we're excited about that.
Are you able to tell us when version 5 is coming?
If I were able to tell you when QLab 5 were coming, that would mean that I would know when QLab 5 is coming. We do not know. We have a strongly held belief that if you set a deadline for software release, you are guaranteeing that that software release will either not contain all the features you hope for, or will contain some kind of error due to rushing. We don't feel like there's any real need for a specific deadline, so we'd really rather make sure that the release is solid and includes everything we want it to include and has been tested thoroughly. And we're just progressing as we're progressing. I can say comfortably that we have been in development for QLab 5 actively for about 1 calendar year now, little less. And we are ticking along at COVID speed. It's this pandemic has really changed lives for everybody, obviously, but for us, what it's meant is sort of refactoring the way that we collaborate, because we were a like 50% remote company, and now we're a 100% remote company. So we've adapted to that, and we're just pushing along as quickly as we can without feeling like we're rushing.
All right, Benjamin.
Just really briefly, Sam, I really admire the way QLab and Figure 53 like really communicate your release schedule. I think it's really admirable, and that like everywhere I see it, I see that exact same messaging, and that's really lovely.
Thank you.
And also, just briefly to Victor's point, I trained a group of high schoolers this fall with some, 3 or 4 Chinese knockoff LEDs, and we made profiles for them, and it happened in about an hour. I believe in users out there. I think it's a really intuitive patching system.
Thank you. Yeah, we try to make it as easy as possible. Creating a lighting definition is exposes to me the truth of modern theatrical lighting, which is that there's a space in between being a lighting designer who understands dramaturgy, who understands optics, who understands story, who understands communicating with the director and working with actors, and then on the opposite end, a real, like, honest to goodness programmer mentality. And the reason that we are earnest about offering definitions to anyone who wants them is because we don't think it's necessary for someone to have to develop the programmer mentality if they don't want to. If they are putting themselves in the mindset of dramaturgy and of optics and of communication, then they should stay there. And QLab is designed to try to let you stay in the mindset that works for you and not have to change the way that your head is operating and turn yourself into a programmer just in order to achieve the purpose of getting some light up over there, please.
I love the agile approach to it of, adding the profiles that you don't already have by just through request, like you don't have to, because you don't know what to do. We did that a lot with some of the software that we wrote, and when we do it with Makana, which is that we're just adding things. We have a lot of things that we want to add ourselves, but just waiting for people to ask the question and then managing it at that moment is, I think, powerful.
Yeah, I mean, there's a gazillion lights out there. I don't know which ones everyone's using.
And you can waste a lot of time,
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Totally makes sense. Next question.
Victor again is in with which features are free with QLab initially?
Sure. So, I'll plug our website, qlab.app, where you can learn as much as there is to learn about QLab, and also, of course, our email address, support@figure53.com. No question is too small, no question is too big, no question is too weird, and no question is too mundane for the support team. And also, to be clear, we provide the same level of support to all folks, whether or not they own a license. We take that very seriously, and it's very important to us. That said, the answer to your question. So in short, as much as is possible, we make free. So the best way to think about it is in terms of limitations. For audio, the limitation for QLab is a maximum of 2-channel output, stereo output. For video, the limitation is that you can use only a single full screen video output. So your cues can be played full raster to a single screen. Although with a video license, you can use multiple outputs and scale your cues. For audio, you can have up to 64 channel outputs. And then for lighting, the limitation comes in terms of patchable addresses, numbers 17 and up. We also have a set of features that you can try out for free. MIDI queues, network queues that can send OSC and plain text UDP messages, and various control queues like devamps, start, stop, pause, and scripting. You can all try that with the free license, but once you save a workspace with those queues and try to reopen it, those queues will only work again if you have a license. So that is what we offer in place of like a demo mode. We do have a demo mode that unlocks everything for 20 minutes, but you can't open or save workspaces when you're in demo mode. So we try to make things available because our main purpose is to let you really try QLab and see, is this the thing I need? Does this do the thing I want? Great, then I will spend money on it. But we would hate for you to have to spend money on it and then just only to discover that it is in fact not what you need.
Roscoe?
And you can rent the full features for like $10 a day. So once you have it all programmed, when you actually need it for a show, you only pay for that day.
That's right. And we get asked a lot about the daily rental. So just to make sure that this is put out there as much as possible, it's not a subscription. It doesn't auto renew. When you buy a rental license, you set a start date and an end date. The license will become active on the start date. Or I'm sorry, you set a start date in a number of days. I haven't done it in a while. It's either start and end date or start date and number of days. But it starts at midnight local time on the day that you set, and it ends at midnight local time on the day that you stop, plus a little grace period, because time zones are weird and computer clocks are weird. In fact, time is weird, and the more you think about it, the less you understand it. That's sort of the basic truth about time. And so we have a grace period built in so that QLab's licenses will never quit on you if you're mid-show. If you have a license that expires and you're in the middle of it, it'll stay valid until you're done.
That's great. That's great. Now go ahead, Lawrence.
Yeah, and so if you rent for the rental period is can you explain what, Sam? If you rent it, you can get a free version after a while, or they give
sure. Yeah. So the QLab 4 rental license policy is like this. If you rent 110 days worth of a QLab license, either all in one go or in little chunks over time, once you get 110 days, you get that license to keep permanently. So we call it rent to own. If you rent 50 days of audio and then 50 days of video and then 10 days of lighting, and you come to the end of your 110 days and you say, gosh, I want a permanent license, but I'm halfway done on 2 of them, you can write to us and we can sort of trade around your credits so that you can add all up to just a permanent audio license or what have you.
That's great.
We're going to be changing that licensing policy presumably as QLab 5. When QLab 5 comes, we don't know exactly how we'll be changing it. We don't know exactly what it will cost because we do not know exactly what QLab 5 is yet. But I like to get the word out as early as possible that if you look over our history of upgrades, we really want to make sure that upgrades feel fair and feel reasonable. And so rental licenses are going to be part of that. If you have rented, accumulated some number of days of rental, I want you to feel confident that that accumulated expenditure is going to retain some meaningful value over time.
I think a lot of times companies have kind of an ethos of what do they want to get out of it or what do the user want to get out of it. And you can tell which one the company goes towards, oftentimes, and the idea is they're trying to think about, well, how do I get the most money out of the user, or how do I just make sure that users are really excited to use my product? And I think as a long-term, development goal, figuring out how users get the most out of the product and how they're happy with it and how they always feel like they got a fair shake might take a little longer to build, but it's a much denser material, that comes out of it.
Yeah. We are a software company, but we aren't really part of the software world right. In terms of mindset and in terms of history. The truth is financial growth of the company is not the major goal. Of course, we want to make money. We need to make money because all of us need to eat and we have families and so forth. And so, of course, it's important to us to make money. but that's not the most important thing. It's important for us, for QLab, to work for our customers. It's important for us, for QLab, to behave the way that our users need it to behave.
Right. Next question.
Katie Kogo is in with, hello, currently having problems with an Ion board that is connected to QLab. It does not connect to IRFR apps on the iPad. Can QLab share port 1 on board? Does it have to be on a separate port to be connected?
So this is fascinating. Okay, so I am not
we dismissed with the softballs, and here comes a fast curve.
Exactly, right. Okay, great. I am not a super expert on IRFR. I have used it from time to time, but the way OSC works through networking generally means that ports can't be shared between two applications. By and large, that is a function of OSC communication and of TCP and UDP port architecture. So I am betting that the thing you need to try is to, well, there's two things you can try. The first thing is, if you have the ability to connect on separate ports, great, that probably can knock it out. But the other possibility is that IRFR, I think, forgive me here, I think IRFR only works with one of the two possible OSC versions that Ion supports. So you need to escape to the shell and try switching to the other OSC version. If someone else here knows more about IRFR, I am totally enthused to hear your answer.
Benjamin?
Yeah, I've used, so the key with IRFR, at least in my testing, has been, it's not exactly an OSC protocol. So as long as, most people using an Ion will have like a lighting control network of some sort, usually a walled garden sort of thing aside from the internet. And then if you want to connect to QLab, some people will connect directly to a Mac running QLab on their second port so that their QLab communications are on a separate network, just to segregate your lighting data and your QLab data. So if you have some kind of Wi-Fi access point on your network data for your lighting control, you can usually run IRFR that way. This is all a long way to say IRFR wants to run on a network port that's configured specifically for that, and there are specific controls for each network port in the shell. So check out there. There's a lot of finicky checkboxes.
That's great. Thanks, Benjamin. Next question.
Moving to another one, and this actually comes in from Benjamin in San Carlos. He asks, are there options for chroma keying directly in QLab?
Short answer is no, and the longer answer is that depending upon what it is you're trying to do, there are plenty of ways to avoid needing chroma key in the first place. In terms of playback of pre-recorded material, QLab supports 2 video codecs that have alpha channels, which means they support transparency. So you can pre-process your pre-recorded video to key out your chroma background, and the resultant video file, if you encode it as ProRes 4444 or as HAP alpha, you can produce a video in which your background is truly transparent. And then QLab's queuing structure allows you to layer that video in front of another video, and the transparent area will allow the video behind your transparent video to show through. Obviously, this is not the same thing as live chroma keying. So if you have a performer in front of a green screen and you want to chroma key that green screen out live through QLab in a camera queue, that is not directly supported. And there have been a couple of workarounds that we've seen various folks try, but we do not have a built-in solution for it. It's something we're looking at. It's something we're looking at as part of a sort of comprehensive, though incremental improvement to camera queues.
If just putting it out there, I used to work on it. My company created a software called DBMat. And then before that Conduit, or after that Conduit, we've thought a lot about green screen. We licensed it to a couple really large pieces of software. But now it's just something that I would love to see in QLab. And if you ever contacted me, I can draw the math out for you. It's super simple. like to do it well.
Yeah,
but not chroma keying. You should do linear keys. Linear keys are the way to go. I promise.
Linear key is
chroma key is,
and help me. Is linear key separate from luma key?
Yeah. So we'll digress for just a moment, and then we'll move on to the next thing. And I'm happy to have a conversation with you about it. But basically, a linear key is red plus the it is the primary color, whether it's blue or green, and then you take the other red plus the other color, and then subtract that from the green or the blue, and that's a linear key, and then you create just contrast controls on each one of those and the mix between those, and that is the GPU will an M1 will suck that up with like 1%. As far as what it takes to do that. I can tell you we've been doing real time since 2008. On these things. So it's a very low processor, but the level of detail on the hair is about 10 times what a chroma key does.
Phenomenal.
And so it really becomes, what you're seeing with the ATEM switchers and stuff, that's a linear key, right? And you can do that in software, and it's super, we've been doing it for a long time, and
our limitation so far has really not been about whether or not we think that it's difficult to achieve on a technical level, but it has to do with UI and about making sure that we do not grow the UI.
We did it
quickly into
we did it for
something
one piece
chaotic.
of software. We did it with one piece of software without any UI. Like literally, if you show up in front of green, it just keyed it. And that was a widely used piece of software. Anyway, next.
And of course, the other thing is that there's a flip side to our user focused lack of primary goal of being profit, which is that we have a small team. The team stays small, and therefore the number of things we can work on at a time is limited, and we choose to spend our development resources very carefully.
Yep. Anyway, just putting it out
no,
there.
please. I love it.
Like, I would love to see green screen in the pipeline, and most people don't do it very well, and it's not hard. Next question. Zoom doesn't do it very
Victor
well.
from the panel here in Brookings says, can you talk about how the concept of fades is used for different functions of QLab?
Sure. So this is, so I get up on my teacher soapbox when people ask about fades, and I say that, folks in the early days of QLab often said things like, how come you don't have a crossfade queue in QLab? Why is there no such thing as a crossfade? And my response is, there is a crossfade queue in QLab. It's called fade, because fade just means a change in level over time. That, to me, is the textbook definition of what a fade is. And so what we have in QLab specifically is a queue type called the fade queue. And the fade queue accepts as a target another queue. So a fade queue can target an audio queue, a video queue, a camera queue, or a mic queue. Those are sort of the most classic examples of targeting. You can also target a group, and we'll talk about that separately if you like. But the purpose of a fade queue is, I know what my target queue is. I will take levels of that target queue and change them over time, however you say. So if you have a fade queue that targets an audio queue, you can change any or every level within the levels matrix of that audio queue. You can also change parameters of any audio effects that queue is using. And the fade queue, when it's run, just reaches out and tells that queue, hey, you change like this, please. If the fade queue targets a video or camera queue, then the fade queue also has the ability to fade the video geometry. So it can change the scale, it can change the position and rotation, and so forth. But the real sort of root concept is that the fade queue is just sort of a little engine that changes numbers, and then you point it where you want, and it changes the numbers that belong to wherever you point it.
That's great. Next question.
Comes to us from Andy Carluccio, our friend from Zoom OSC. QLab is known and loved in the world of theater, but what's the most exotic use of the program you've seen, perhaps in a different industry?
Most exotic use of QLab that I've seen is not the fanciest, but it is the farthest away from theater. One of our developers, after parting ways with Figure 53 amicably, went and worked for JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. and NASA and JPL used QLab in the rehearsals for preparing for the Mars landing of one of the rovers. QLab was used as a just as a rehearsal tool. QLab was not in control of any spaceships, I am sorry to say.
But it could be.
Yeah, sure. You know, time codes used wrong all over the world, and including for spaceships. I hope not. But that's the most exotic use, and we were all very, very proud. Some other sort of fancy uses of QLab on the, again, talking about space, because I'm a bit of a space fan. The 50th anniversary of the Apollo moon landing had a big celebration on the National Mall, and they projected a life-sized replica of a life-sized image of the of Apollo 11 on the side of the Washington Monument, and that whole event was controlled by QLab. The opening ceremonies in Pyeongchang and in London Olympics were both using QLab as time code conductors. Although those feel like performing arts as well.
That's great. Do you know of any fireworks companies that use it?
I do not know, and I do not recommend it. I profoundly do not recommend it. And the reason is this. We are not OSHA reviewed. I stand by my work, but I stand by my work up to, but not including, the limits of human safety, because that is not the realm of my expertise.
Right.
No fire.
I'm sorry?
No fire.
Yeah, no fire. And so what our standing policy is that if you're going to use QLab to interact with any system that involves human safety, thing one is we absolutely insist that you use a person in the loop switch of some kind, a switch that requires positive and proactive human involvement to enable the dangerous thing, so that human. I'm sorry?
We lost you. You went black.
Oh dear. Am I still gone?
This is why you don't use it in fireworks.
Yes. Give me just a moment.
It was very well timed. It was very well timed. It was like, this is why,
because things can go wrong, and it's not a good idea when you've got explosives.
San Diego. This little black
this
thing
is the San Diego.
Yeah.
Am I back?
Yeah,
all the fireworks right now.
Yeah.
Great. We're going to see a funny little.
Oh, you disappeared again. Oh, there he goes.
Dear. All right. Well, give me just a moment.
Yep. We'll go to the next question while you're stacking up.
Okay. It's going to come in from Jonas Datal, our friend from Reutlingen, Germany. Any plans on a Windows or Linux, version of QLab?
I have switched to a backup camera. The answer to that question is that no, there is no plan for us to do that. And we get asked this question a pretty fair amount, and it goes like this. We're a small team. We have 6 developers, and these 6 developers are all experts at developing macOS software. So if we wanted to develop a Windows version, let's say, we would at minimum have to double our team. So if I'm going to hire 6 more developers, that means I have to double my developer budget for salaries. Because I was the product manager for QLab 4, I am here to tell you it would take an absolute minimum of 2 years, absolute minimum, to develop a Windows or Linux version. And I believe that it would probably take 3. So that means that for 2 or 3 years, we would have to tolerate double the staffing budget in exchange for 0 increase in income. Then at the conclusion of those 2 or 3 years, we would need to increase our marketing budget to make sure that people knew that the Windows or Linux version was out there. And then we would need to increase our support team to make sure that we were able to support the Windows and Linux configurations out there. Also, is anyone here able to tell me roughly how many available configurations of Windows computers there are?
27.
I'm a little vague on that number.
Exponent on it somewhere.
Yeah. Exactly. And here's the truth. And then what would we get? What would the result be? The result would be that some folks who have modest QLab needs could save some money buying Windows hardware or more generic hardware to run QLab. If you look at a true apples to apples, no pun intended, apples to apples comparison of the performance of computer hardware across OSs, the honest truth is that the amount of money you save if you're looking for good performing hardware, the amount of money you save when you buy a Linux or Windows machine is just not that much. It's smaller than the amount of money that you pay for a QLab license. And so our feeling is this monumental effort, this monumental increase in complexity, this guaranteed slowing down of our development and release cycle, and the financial risk of the company being unable to support it is just not worth the possibility that a few folks can save a few bucks some of the time.
And the cross platform will haunt you forever. Like, because you have libraries that have to be supported across all these different platforms. I'm a big fan of whether it's PC or Mac. Like, I don't want vMix to come to the Mac, because I think vMix should stay focused on what they do well. Like, they understand those libraries, they understand how to make that work. I'm not waiting for them to come. In the same way, I don't want QLab or anything else that I'm depending on to be, move from the Mac to the PC, because I don't want you to, there will be compromise. And we used to develop for both the Mac and PC. So I'm very clear of the challenges, and we dumped the PC platform because it was, 90%, or it was 10% of our sales and 90% of our support. And so we were just like, this doesn't pencil out. And so we dropped it. And so, same thing. No, next question.
Yeah. You got to stick with what you're good at. And I came up through a Montessori education philosophy. I thoroughly, enthusiastically support exploration of stuff that you're not good at. I think you can learn a lot by trying things that you're not any good at. But when you have a responsibility to other people, as we feel we have a responsibility to everyone using QLab, to make sure that QLab stays solid and stays predictable and keeps doing what they need it to do, right, the risk of disrupting that in order to make a Windows or Linux version is just so great. And that makes us anxious to think about.
Yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Doug Ferguson at Fort Wayne, often on the panel. I can't see if he's here today, but asked, does QLab support NDI and Hulk mode?
Wait, what was the second question?
Nothing. No, does QLab support NDO?
Okay.
NDI?
All right. I detect a joke that I'm not in on, but that's all right. Forgive Metro North if you hear a blaring train siren in the background. I'm sorry for that. QLab does not directly support NDI at this time. NDI tools were most recently updated on Mac that supports an NDI virtual camera, which QLab can see. I tested it out yesterday. It's not very impressive performance-wise, I gotta say. It's low frame rate. But for those of you who need NDI support in QLab today, you want NDI Siphon, which is a free piece of software made by the folks who make Isadora, which is a glorious, wacky, complicated piece of video generation and performance software that that I love, and also I don't use because it's not what I do. NDI Siphon allows you to receive NDI streams on a Mac and then publish them as Siphon outputs. QLab can take Siphon as an input. And then NDI Siphon also allows you to take Siphon outputs from your Mac and publish them to the network as an NDI stream. And so QLab can use Siphon for video output as well. So you can output through Siphon to NDI Siphon to NDI, and you can input from NDI to NDI Siphon to QLab. I've tested NDI Siphon out as well, and it performs quite well. Even over, I've sort of tested it in sort of a deliberately stressful situation, Wi-Fi, not trying things very carefully, moving things around so that there's physical interference. And, there's latency, but after the latency passes, you get pretty clean frame rate and very clean picture. So I'm happy with the NDI Siphon. And then all of this is to say, we understand that NDI is a big deal, and we are going to take NDI very seriously moving forward.
Outstanding. Next question.
And I skipped Courtney's because it was the Windows and Mac version that we just addressed at length. I'm sorry, Courtney. Moving on to A. Mitchells of Washington. What amazing and even unexpected things can be done with QLab lighting? When would someone need to use it? When shouldn't they compared to the other products available? And note also it can be applied to in some way to Internet of Things devices.
Excellent 2 questions. Okay. So the thing for me that is sort of important and valuable to think about with QLab lighting is 2 things. The first thing is sparse cues. And so I'm going to get a little technical on lighting for a moment, and my apologies if this blows past folks, but this is where the question has led us. So a traditional lighting console that supports tracking cues, what does that mean? It means that when you run a cue and you say, all right, change all these channels, and then you run another cue and it says change these other channels, the end result after running Q1 and then Q2 is all the changes of Q1 plus the changes of Q2. Right? Which is to say the second cue does not override Q1. Q2 can say, just change these other 3 channels and keep the changes from the previous channel. The truth is that on a traditional tracking console, that what happens under the covers is that Q2 contains a copy of Q1. And if you change Q1, that automatically changes Q2 as well. And so it works fine. I have no negative feelings about tracking at all. I like tracking. I use tracking. I think ETC is wonderful. I think Strand is wonderful, and they do great work. Just to make that super clear, I really think that. What QLab does, however, is different and opens the door to some possibilities, because what we do is not tracking. We have cues that contain only the commands you put in them. So if my Q1 says channels 1, 2, 3 at full, and then Q2 says channels 4, 5, 6 at full, if I run only Q2, I only get 4, 5, 6 at full. If I run Q1, I get 1, 2, 3 at full. If I run them in either order, but I run both of them, the end result is channels 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 at full. I can optionally ask later cues to do what we call collating. Collating means when I run, look up the stack, pretend the human ran all the light cues, and then run me. And so that is how we can effectively produce an exact replica of traditional tracking behavior. But once in a while, that is not what you want. For those of you who are around my age or older, you will remember that at one point in the 1990s, this brilliant concept was cracked in which lighting consoles had multiple fader pairs. You had on the Expresses, you had the A, B, and the CD. And then on the Obsession, you had 1 through 8, or I guess they were lettered as well, in which you could allow multiple sets of cues to run simultaneously. So the classic example that I have seen most is I have a series of lighting cues, but meanwhile, on my other fader pair, in the background on the cyclorama, a half-hour sunset is running. And all my lighting cues that execute on the A-B pair sort of ignore what's happening on the CD pair, and vice versa. In QLab, you don't need to think about fader pairs because every cue affects only the channels that you ask it to. So if I have Q1 say, give me a 30-minute fade on this channel, and then all my other cues just forget about that and run their own thing. For me, that is the unique power that QLab offers, 1. 2, QLab's queuing structure, if you're already accustomed to it, is powerful and flexible in ways that lots of other queuing structures are not. If you create a timeline group with an audio cue in it, you can layer your lighting cues into that same timeline group visually. You can align cues to markers in your audio cue with it's got a little magnetism on the marker. So you can just snap all your lighting cues directly to points in the audio or video and run that all in one enclosed timeline. So I think that's the other real advantage to QLab, which is to say there are plenty of situations that those are not advantages. Those are not useful to you. And in those situations, we say you should use QLab if it suits you. You should use something else if it suits you. We do not claim that QLab is the be-all and the end-all of lighting control at all. Certainly, in terms of like things it can do, fancy powers and effects, and Ion has effects wrapped up compared to us at this time. And if that's what you need, elaborate chases and elaborate manipulation of moving lights, that's not where our strength lies right now. The separate question is, can this be applied in some way to IoT devices? I assume that what you're asking about here is like smart light bulbs. And at the moment, the answer is no. QLab only communicates using ArtNet and the NTEC USB DMX protocol. So we support NTEC, DMX King, and Yarrow USB DMX devices. We've gotten some requests for support of the Philips Hue protocol or the LifeX protocol. If that's something that folks really want, I encourage you to write to us and let us know. If that's something people want and we don't hear about it, then we will never know you want it, and then we will never spend time on it. The squeaky wheel gets the grease generally. I don't want to make any promises based on squeaky wheels, but it is really valuable for us to learn from people what it is that they want QLab to do and what it is they want to use in QLab.
As a warning, when we're decided, we can be a really squeaky wheel really fast. So we'll see how that goes.
Listen, I'll tell you, I'm not one of the QLab developers. I do not have authority over them.
Right.
And so some of the time I find that I'm lobbying for a feature and it ends up being the QLab community backing my argument that actually helps me persuade my colleagues of the truth of the thing that I'm saying. So I find the squeaky wheels useful as long as you all also understand that time is limited and we can only do so many things at once.
Absolutely. Next question.
Our friend Lopez Waterman is in with, you mentioned the idea of a more nonlinear workflow. Could you speak to how QLab works in this regard? I love QLab, but I really only used it linearly in the theater and excited to hear more.
Sure. So there are a couple of things in QLab that are designed with the assumption that you're moving in a linear fashion. A queue list, the basic behavior of a queue list is that when a queue goes, QLab then waits on the next queue. However, it doesn't require that you move linearly through the list. You can always, you can always move the playhead around and trigger queues out of order whenever you feel like. So as long as you do what I like to call defensive programming, which is to say making sure that any queue that executes doesn't require a specific set of other queues to have run in order to behave properly, you can jump around your queue list whenever you feel like. There are a few things that can help with this. Queues can be triggered individually using hotkeys, which is to say keys on your keyboard, using MIDI triggers or OSC triggers. So if you have a MIDI piano, you can assign each key on your piano to a separate queue. And then whenever you play the piano, you play those cues. I myself used QLab in that way at a performance. I produced a MIDI instrument using touch sensors and bell peppers. It was a Christmas concert, so I played Carol of the Bell Peppers on green and red peppers. And each pepper was connected to a touch capacitance sensor on an Arduino. The Arduino converted each individual touch capacitive input into a MIDI note. The MIDI notes triggered individual cues in QLab, which played different notes in a scale. So as I played on the bell peppers, QLab just played these cues at random. Not at random, sorry, on demand, out of order. So that's a way to use QLab out of order.
Tell me that's on video somewhere.
It's on video somewhere. I have to dig it up. Someone filmed it while it was
someone
happening.
asked you, what do you play? I play the bell peppers. Anyway, next question.
Little bell
I'm still on
peppers,
squash. Victor from Brookings, South Dakota in the panel. When will you be Apple M1 fully compatible?
Last week.
Amazing.
So here's what. QLab 4, as of last week, has a completely M1 compatible release that runs in Rosetta 2 emulation. And I'll take this opportunity in front of this audience to take my hat off to Apple. Rosetta 2 is profoundly impressive. I just don't understand the magic sauce that they've put into it, but it's incredible. QLab 4 is never going to be M1 native or Apple Silicon native. The rebuild process that it would take is equal to the effort of building QLab 5, so we would rather just build QLab 5. QLab 5 on release day will be Apple Silicon native and will be universal, so backwards compatible with Intel. But as of right now, QLab 4 is M1 compatible in emulation.
That's good. Next question.
Victor is back again and suggested interface for DMX or ArtNet using QLab. And he says, sorry for all the questions, but everybody's enjoying this.
No, it's good. So suggested DMX or ArtNet interfaces. So ArtNet is cool because as a network protocol, it sort of doesn't matter what you use on the other end, right? If you find an ArtNet device that has what you need and costs what you can afford, then it works. I like NTech generally. I think NTech hits a good sort of price to feature relationship. If you've got money to burn, you can go to Pathport and just spend a truly profound amount of money on their hardware, which, to be fair, is utterly Tor-proof and will never break. Doug Fleener also makes a small ArtNet, a small selection of ArtNet devices, and I trust Dr. Doug with anything that he and they make. For USB connections, we have a pretty limited set of interfaces to support, and we do that basically for to be able to stand by a guarantee of quality performance. So we support the NTech and DMX King and Yarilo basic USB DMX interfaces. We don't support every single one. The open DMX architecture, we don't support those because they don't contain an opto isolator, which means that if someone plugs in a malperforming light fixture, they can end up frying your Mac, and we don't want any part of that. But I saw someone putting links to DMX King and to NTech's stuff in the chat, and that's what we stand by. We don't support the ETC gadget. We get asked about that a lot. The ETC gadget uses its own protocol. We might explore that. We don't know if that's possible. And we don't support the Eurolight DMX interfaces, notably. Those seem to be relatively popular because they're relatively cheap. But if you're just looking for a small, reliable, solid stuff, I don't think you can go wrong with DMX King at all.
Next question.
Mickey, our audio guru from Manila, is asking if QLab supports large channel count RF64 WAV files.
QLab supports, at this moment, multi-channel WAV, AIFF, or CAF audio files up to 24 inputs. That's the current limitation in QLab, 24 channels, and so that's what we support. We're exploring the possibility of increasing the channel count in QLab 5, maybe to some, I don't know, tell us what number. The reason we have 24 channels is because 24 channels supports every surround format that I have encountered in real life, and then leaves a little space for extra.
I just worked on a surround show, 37 channels.
37?
Yeah.
So it sounds like there's an argument to at least go to 37.
Yeah. Mickey worked on it with me, and he's like, yes. I mean, I would just say round it off to 64, but I can tell you that we use 37 channels and 10-bit video, which is not available on QLab.
Yeah, 10-bit video is 10-bit video is still comparatively new compared to our extant video pipeline. And so it's something that we're exploring. We recently had a conversation with the event production folks at Apple, and they are also really interested in 10-bit video. So it's something we're digging into and learning about.
We can't represent HDR without 10-bit.
Right.
That's what all of us that are asking for 10-bit video is because we're doing production in some version of high dynamic range, either PQ or Vision.
Yeah. The codecs that QLab draws upon and the APIs that QLab draws from, Apple could make a little clearer if they felt like it, how to implement those things. And so that's why it's not just a slam dunk, sure, done. But it is something we're working on. It is something we understand and something we take seriously. We did I realized, have a request for 128 channels of input. NBC's live musicals, which one was it? I think Peter Pan Live had a 128 stem mix that they wanted to bring into QLab Live. And we said, that sounds really like quite a lot to us. Are you quite sure that's what you want to do? And they said, oh, yes. We've got a fully loaded Mac Pro. We're going to take care of it. It's going to be great. And so that felt like an outlier to us. So now we know 37 is a more practical number.
I mean, functionally we were doing multiple languages on playout. So the reason that there's so many is because we still were only using the surround was 12 or it was 10 plus 2, but then what would happen is we're swapping languages out, and so the languages are left, right, center, and stereo have to be switched out for every language. And
of course.
So you have, for every language you add five tracks. So you can do the math on how many languages we did. But anyway, the point is that we would want to have more, because there could be a time when we want 18 languages or whatever. We have to swap all of those out.
More languages.
And
all right, well that is I certainly won't call it the first, but that is the most succinct and compelling explanation of why someone wants more input channels than they've got that I've heard. And so I really appreciate that. That gives me something tangible to aim at.
But for us, we need 10-bit too. And if you're going to do 10-bit, you might as well do 12-bit. I'm just saying.
Video?
Yeah. You might as well. It's going to be the same amount of work to support 10 and 12 as it is 10, I promise. And the 12-bit means that it makes it easier for us to stretch to 4,000 nits. Anyway, next question.
Moving on, Benjamin Antiput here from San Carlos, California in the panel. Sam, how are you connecting QLab into Zoom?
Right. This is good. So there are two different answers depending upon your Zoom setup. Not in my capacity with Figure 53, but in my alter ego as I'm a theatrical sound designer. That is my principal history. And so that's really where I started, and that's where I feel like I live. So I did a play on Zoom recently called American Dreams, and it was an extensively complicated thing because we had to invent how to turn theater into Zoom theater without it feeling fake while we were doing it. If you are able to use screen sharing, I am here to tell you that is going to be the most reliable, high quality way to communicate between QLab and Zoom, both for audio and video. But it requires that your audience is all in Zoom. If your audience is outside of Zoom, if your audience is watching on YouTube, or if Zoom is outputting to some other context, screen sharing no longer gives you that guarantee of looking and sounding best. We have on our website something called the QLab Zoom Guide, which I will, it's under qlab.app/tutorials, and I'm not going to make my speech too stuttery as I try to copy and paste it. But the QLab Zoom Guide shows all the different ways to get audio and video from QLab into Zoom, according to a couple of different possibilities, depending upon what you need.
That's great. Next question. Oh, I'm going to do one thing. Sam, we did this as a second hour. There's still more questions. Is your time constrained, or can you keep going?
No. I'm open.
Okay, great. And I'm time constrained. So I have a 9 o'clock that I'm about to be late with. I'm going to drop out and let the team keep on having this conversation with you, because it's one of our best hours. So I want to keep going if everyone's okay with that. So I'm gonna pop out and let everyone keep going. Thank you so much, Sam, for coming. It's really
thank you so much for having me. It's really, I am enjoying this a great deal.
Okay, great. All right, I'm gonna drop out. Take it away, guys.
And people are fascinated, and there are lots of questions. The next one comes from Brian Schwartz in Baltimore, and
Bill,
he asks,
in the moment of
Schy?
in the moment of the last conversation, Lawrence has also been doing a live, and I was curious if you had involved QLab in what presentation you did with the high school at all.
No, that was all post editing. There was no QLab involved in that.
Would you have thought this solution could have helped you even in creating some of the content that you did? No, Roscoe's saying no.
No, it was a different approach to it. But tapping into the last question as well, Sam, you can also bring in QLab over a siphon into Zoom, right?
That's right. So there's a little trick here, which is made up of a few small pieces. But once you see how those few small pieces work together, you're in business. So small piece number one is a piece of software called Siphon Virtual Webcam. and it was created in order to allow you to take a siphon source and make it appear to the Mac as though it is as a webcam. So that's piece one. Once Siphon Virtual Webcam is running, you can take the output of QLab and pipe it to Siphon. And so your video output of QLab goes to Siphon. That goes to Siphon Virtual Webcam. And then in Zoom, you can choose that as your camera source. So that's what I was doing a little while until something somewhere got unplugged. That's my camera changed partway through the hour because I had been using my camera piped through a Blackmagic device into QLab, into a camera queue, into Siphon Virtual Webcam, into Zoom. That's how I got my pretty camera working. But now you see I've stepped back to my USB camera. So that's the way to get video from QLab into Zoom as your raster, not as screen share.
Schy, do you need more detail?
Well, I'd like to explore he said dramaturgy. You had me at dramaturgy because theater is my history. And so, Sam, I'd be curious in this, because latency, Victor is using QLab extensively, and he's trying to be collaborative with other musicians at the same time. Now, theater, of course, has rise and fall and interaction and that engagement, the eye contact on the. So I'd be curious, did you do a live Zoom experience with multiple characters? And if you really?
Not only that, Schy, it was multiple characters doing traditional theater live, interacting, and we had an audience interaction component.
What?
And if it hadn't been for the audience interaction component, it would have looked and sounded perfect 100% of the time. We had it cracked, but we couldn't get audience interaction in real time with good audio. So we ended up doing something pretty bonkers. We had the cast in Skype. Skype outputted each individual cast member via NDI to Isadora, which did a composite. And the Isadora composite appeared as a camera in Zoom, which the audience joined. So the individual actors were not individual Zoom participants. All the actors together were the output of the show as a single person in Zoom.
You brought in the cast as an identity.
Right, we brought in, and the reason that worked dramaturgically is because the idea of the show, it's a play, the stage play, which it was originally, is the audience of the stage play is given to understand that they are the studio audience at a television broadcast of a game show.
Yeah.
And so what we did was bring individual audience members into the Zoom and say, hi, welcome to Zoom as the Zoom audience for the broadcast of this show.
Sure.
And so that made it dramaturgically acceptable for the cast to all appear as a single user in a produced look without it feeling weird that we were like, because all the audience members, when you're at the theater, you're in the theater. But when you're looking at Zoom, you're in your house. And nothing you do on screen can change the fact that you're in your house.
Well, what you're doing is managing expectations of both the audience. What is my role in this environment, in this experience? And you're getting the interactivity, but you're getting the liveness of the audience. And that's what actors thrive on. That's where they survive on. So I'd be very curious. I'm doing a weekly improv workshop, and we are actually putting audience members in the Zoom because we need that laughter. And so we've been leaving all the mics on, and it's been kind of horrible, but it's also been kind of.
So for leaving mics on, I can't are you hip to turn on original sound in Zoom?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, we do that every day.
If everyone's wearing headphones and everyone turns on original sound, the experience of liveness goes through the roof because the simultaneity returns. There is latency, but overlap becomes natural instead of overcompressed and gated.
What are you doing tomorrow at noon West Coast time?
Okay, we have to get through the rest of these questions. So we have 6, 7, 8, 9, and I think we're going to have after hours. So you guys, hopefully, Sam, you'll be around and able to do that. But let's work through everybody's questions for a little bit, and then we'll come back to this vertical, which is fascinating, and I'll be there for it. Brian Schwartz of Baltimore has our next question, and he's just saying, is there any reason why QLab is based in Baltimore, Maryland, Sam?
Oh, sure. Baltimore, Maryland is where QLab's founder lives.
That's enough. There's your answer right there. Moving on to Jim Wilkins of Marblehead, Massachusetts. I love the Group Q timeline mode. One issue I have is that if I want to jump to a different spot in the Group Q during rehearsal, the cursor sometimes will move in some cues, but not in others, and they're no longer in sync. Any suggestions for addressing that?
Yeah, that's a pain in the neck. It totally is a pain in the neck. It's very difficult to make the timeline Group Q work the way it works. And every marginal improvement on it feels like, oh, yes, we did it. We made it 0.5% better. And the developers are real heroes. And I love the timeline mode. And this issue is something that we've been continually chipping away at, and we're going to continue to chip away at. Until then, thing number one, stop all your cues before jumping around. I know that that is not always ideal, but if you're in rehearsal, that maybe is something you can cope with. Thing number two, click in the ruler to jump ahead, or select the group cue and use the load to time tool. Command T opens the load to time tool, and then you can either type in a number or you can drag the slider. If all your cues are stopped and you select the timeline group and you use the load to time tool, that always works, unless you're doing something truly bonkers in your cue programming.
Okay, moving along to the next question. It's a pretty big one. A. Mitchell's often questioner here says, if you couldn't use QLab, let's imagine it doesn't exist, what media server, playback, or device control software on either PC or Mac would you use instead, and why? Which features of these other products would you be excited to try to get into QLab, or might be delighted by or jealous of how they work in the other? And he also has a note, also keep in mind that there may be a limit needed on saying nice things about QLab. Playout B and Zoom OSC for the purposes of time. And thanks again for being here today.
I'm delighted to be here. If QLab didn't exist, well, let's see. When I first encountered QLab, I had been using a piece of software that I wrote in, believe it or not, HyperCard. For those of you who remember HyperCard, that I wrote something that could be imagined to be an early sort of pre-QLab audio playback software. And when QLab came along, I was like, oh, thank goodness, because this is not very good, and I'm not a very good programmer, so I don't have to keep supporting this. So if QLab didn't exist is a question that I actually address pretty regularly. I am pretty interested in Canvas, which is made by Ave. I'm not sure I'm pronouncing it correctly. It's an interesting piece of audio playback software that has a lot of concepts that I find fascinating and appealing. Video playback. I've used VDMX. I think VDMX is cool, but it's not so much a program as it is a toolbox for building your own program. And while I find that fun, I know that not everyone necessarily does find that fun, and it can be impractical, but I think that it's powerful. Millumin is pretty groovy. I'm pretty into Millumin. MadMapper is very groovy for like the output stage. Someone just put MIDI in MITTI in the link. I agree, that's an interesting option. But the truth is that part of what keeps me on QLab is that I have not yet found something else that does what it does. And I'm trying not to sound like a shill for the company I work for, but I do consider myself a customer first, and that's where I am.
Fair enough. We're going to move to Benjamin Antiput's question, and he's saying, any ideas or options for custom video effects now that Apple has Quartz Composer deprecated and it's on its way out?
Yes, pour one out for QC. It was cool. It was ahead of its time, and then it rapidly was behind its time, I think is the history of Quartz Composer, unfortunately. We have a lot of interest in sort of figuring out how to replace Quartz Composer. QLab 5 will not use Quartz Composer. It can't. It literally can't. So if we're going to move on into the future and to Apple Silicon, Quartz Composer is finished. So we're not sure. The answer is we're not sure. And I don't want to suggest, I don't want to hint at anything because there really is no answer right now. It's been suggested to us that we look at View, VUO. It's been suggested to us that we look at like some kind of more direct connection to Max MSP and Jitter. Again, I love Max MSP and Jitter, but it's a hill to climb to get started. And I admire and love it, but like it's not for beginners. So we're really just sort of starting that process. I think our first step is going to try to be to figure out what are most of the things that people use Quartz Composer compositions for, and then just build that stuff right into QLab. It won't solve every case, but if we can say like, oh yeah, 75% of the time people use Quartz compositions to do this, and then QLab just does that and you don't need it, that's a great start.
Fair enough. Moving on to Dale Nabeta's question from Oakland, California. Are there any thoughts of building a hardware control surface to be able to program the QLab lighting setup similar to the hardware consoles and so forth?
That's a super appealing idea, isn't it? It's not something that we are in the middle of exploring right now. Hardware is the great thing about being in software development is that your warehousing costs are like zero because software is very, very small. When
not very tall or wide.
Send it almost. Hardware is a whole new challenge. It's a distinctly different challenge to software development. I have a little side hustle. When I'm not on the job, I build these things. This is the Go Box, which is a QLab centric MIDI controller, and I have started exploring an OSC based fader surface, and personally, and just doing that on my own is enough to help me realize it's a monster of a challenge just to engineer it properly, let alone to sell it properly, warehouse it properly, manufacture it, support it, service it, do returns. So it's something that maybe we might kind of sort of eventually consider, but it is certainly not in the forefront of our thinking.
You popped Victor's hand up with a comment there a minute ago.
I sure
Victor?
did.
I just wanted to know, I mean, currently, could you use some of the MIDI multi-fader controllers to kind of emulate some of that functionality today if you were, MIDI savvy at all, really?
Yeah, right now there is a, what I like to say is a really good start at robust MIDI control of the light dashboard. You can assign MIDI controls to any parameter in the dashboard or to the selected parameters. So I can say, for instance, if I have an 8-channel MIDI fader board, I can say, okay, slider number 1, that goes to the selected intensity. And then whatever light is selected in the dashboard, that slider is my intensity. Slider number 2 is selected pan. Slider number 3 is selected tilt, and so forth. And I have the one and only Behringer product I have ever actually endorsed. I have the X-Touch, which is the only completely reliable motorized MIDI surface that costs less than $1,000 that I've ever encountered. And so I've used the X-Touch for lighting control, and it isn't flawless, but as you say, Victor, it is a solid start. And so I think something that we might be much more likely to do than develop our own hardware is to just really build out that MIDI support as much as we can so that people can use the hardware of their own choosing.
Nice. Okay. Our very much show friend George Kennedy Jr. in Washington, D.C. asks, any plans for improvements to the video playback feature in QLab 5? He wants the previous video to stop when the current one is playing. It's his list is a bit to put here. Oh, he's got a long list, I guess.
A longer list.
Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to tell you that the first item on your list has already been solved. QLab 4 can do that. But I want to politely challenge your premise with respect. When you say the previous video to stop when the current is playing, that suggests to me that you are working in a paradigm where only one cue at a time is playing. This guy, when I design a show, you almost never have only one cue at a time playing. If I'm doing The Tempest and we're out in the woods, I would say there's an absolute bare minimum of 6 audio cues playing simultaneously. Over there are the tweeting birds, and there is the babbling brook, and back there is the wind and the thunder in the distance, and so forth. So for me, the idea of the current cue is a lighting concept that doesn't really belong for me in either audio or video. So the first thing to say is consider what the sort of paradigm is that you're coming at, and consider whether the possibility exists that other folks use QLab in a completely different paradigm. That said, if you select any cue in QLab and go to the Triggers tab in the inspector and look on the right side, the first tick box says Fade and Stop. And when you check that box, you get a drop-down menu that lets you choose Peers, List, or All. And what that means is, let's start with All. If you select All, when you run that cue, all other cues in QLab fade out and stop over whatever amount of time you put in the text field to the right. So if you want to just have a single cue running at any time, guaranteed, just make sure that all your cues have Fade and Stop All enabled. If you switch it to Fade and Stop List, then the context for the cues that get faded and stopped are only that same cue list. So you could have multiple cue lists that don't prevent each other from playing. And then if you switch to Fade and Stop Peers, that means that triggering this cue only fades and stops the other cues at the same hierarchical level. So if you have cues inside a group, they are peers of each other, but the cues outside the group are not peers. So using List, All, or Peers, you can create some range of rules for each individual cue to fade out and stop other cues when they get triggered.
So I'm kind of hearing that when you're working in this, you don't necessarily have to think serially. You can think parallel and mix the two modes together as you're working through your cue system.
I think that's a really beautiful way to put it.
Okay. Michael Paley of New York Metro is coming up next. Follow-up. Part of the boom mic to mini question, the BOMM boom, I guess it's boom mic to mini question, was whether there's any difference between unbalanced in or embedding in the audio into available HDMI. I'm having a little trouble parsing that. Somebody have a clear idea?
I think I do, but I'll let Mickey handle this.
I think this is related to a question from earlier regarding feeding audio directly into an ATEM mini.
Okay. Do we miss it somehow?
Yeah. I would say, like, yeah, if you could somehow embed the audio into an input from the audio from the microphone into an input that is balanced, and that then feeds audio via HDMI into the ATEM mini, that would be better, since you would get the benefits of common mode noise rejection on a balanced connection, as opposed to going into the ATEM mini, which is an unbalanced connection.
Fair enough. Hope that took care of what
once
you
the
were
signal's inside, once the audio signal's inside the HDMI connection, it is impervious to analog noise. And so just the sooner you can do that, the better you are.
Yeah, it'll isolate you a little. Steve Innoing, and it looks like he's in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, asks, is it possible to see the light design in the audition window?
You're asking for us to build an entire lighting design visualizer into the audition window?
Asking's easy.
Yeah, no, that would be rad. I 100% agree. That would be rad, and we would love to do that. And I think the fact that you can't find a good visualization software package for less than $800 US should give you a clue as to the scale of complexity of creating lighting visualization software. I've been talking with the Vectorworks folks. Their visualization package is groovy and expensive, but they were interested in like creating some kind of QLab to Vectorworks link, and we're like, yeah, take ArtNet in, and then you've already done it. It's over. No need to work on anything. We would love to build something into the audition window like that. That would be superb. I don't see it happening soon, not because it isn't meritorious, but because there are, right now our to-do list is just over 1,400 items. And I think that there are at least a dozen that are more useful in terms of a broad appeal than visualization.
fair enough. Victor's
Sam,
back from
real quick.
Oh, go ahead,
Sam. A
Roscoe.
real simple one that could just do one instrument at a time, though, would be very helpful for just training and just.
Just to be like, oh look, I made it orange successfully. Good for me. Okay,
Yeah,
great.
I mean,
I
really
know what
basic.
I'm doing now. Okay, yeah, that's got merit. That's got merit for sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just really briefly too, like take ETC on their Nomad software. Really recently added Augmented, which is their like visualizer thing, and ETC's been around for a while making automated lighting solutions, and only now do they create their own visualizer. So it seems like a bit of a tall order. But
Also,
still, the lighting dashboard offers a really good offer.
At least 50 people at least 3 years, which is like, and it's an achievement, and like it's super cool. I love it, and we have some tentative, delicate, sort of casual partnerships between QLab and ETC that might bear fruit in the long term, but at the moment are just sort of conversational. And so I got to talk to them a little bit about that, and it's just like, that was not a small job, and my hat is off to them as well. It's amazing what they've pulled off.
Roscoe, do you have a note?
No, I have questions in.
Okay, fair enough. We're going to move on to Victor's next question in the regular queue. Any hints for controlling pen tilt zoom cameras like the HuddleCam HD via QLab?
Not straightforward. Okay, so if there are any PTZ cameras out there that accept OSC control, please tell me about it, because I will absolutely make sure that works with QLab. I will publish a tutorial, etc. The trouble is that most PTZ cameras support a standard that has never exited the world of PTZ cameras, and so it's 100% understood within the world of PTZ cameras as a functional standard that everyone understands. But once you step outside that world, no one's heard of it, no one understands it. And we are among that large group of no ones. So the answer right now is, if you have serial control acceptable, there's a range of boxes made by a company called Moxa. These are really inexpensive boxes that take OSC in and provide RS-232 or RS-485 out. So if you have a serial controllable PTZ camera, this is your guy. It's like $100. Put an Ethernet cable in this side and just send an OSC message, or I'm sorry, a UDP message that is just the string of your serial control message, just written out in plain text as a network queue in QLab. Run that queue. It goes to the Moxa. The Moxa takes that string and produces a serial message if you have a serial controllable PTZ camera. So that's my answer right now. Unfortunately, it costs extra money and extra hardware, but there it is.
Yeah, maybe Andy Carluccio and his team will figure out a way.
But I think maybe Victor knows something I don't know about this, which I would love to learn about.
Just a workaround that I've done to make it work is using PTZ Optics software and then Keyboard Maestro to trigger through MIDI movements of mouse into regions. I have been able to replicate different movements in the camera and different zoom levels, and I've incorporated that into a QLab show using MIDI commands to trigger those Keyboard Maestro macros, and it works.
Keyboard Maestro is rad, and but it scares me a little, right? Because it's like, if the button is here, click on it. I'm like, well, what if I move the window? Does it know the button moved too? Like, stuff like that makes me antsy.
This is the next thing I'm trying to solve, so I'll keep you informed. But for right now, the nice thing about the PTZ Optics software is that the buttons have a really large target. So if you even move the window by 30 pixels, you're still pretty good to go.
I like that. Good thinking.
Okay, moving on to Roscoe Jones, and our, I think, second to last. Roscoe has a couple of questions here. As a sound designer, what are your thoughts on Dolby Atmos or 7.1 surround? How many surround channels do you prefer? And what about PanLab? And has a link there. And he also says, thanks for a great hour. Yes.
Oh, it's really my pleasure. I've been enjoying it a great deal. As a sound designer, my thoughts on Dolby Atmos and 7.1 surround are that they are broadcast standards that I have the utmost respect for, and I don't think have any place in live theater. I mean, no disrespect, but when I was coming up, there was this argument about should theater sound be mono or stereo? And I didn't have the vocabulary at that time to say what I now can say, but I understood it in like the kernel form back then, but now I can say it. Stereo and mono aren't things. Stereo and mono are you have two ears and you are in a space, and sound comes in the space from wherever it comes. The right number of channels in a live theater is how many places do you need sound to come from? That many. So I did a play that was set in the Guatemalan jungle, and I had 35 outputs. I did a play that was set in a small apartment in New York. I had 4 outputs. I did a play called The Piano Lesson, in which a ghost has to appear and throw someone down the stairs, hold them by the throat up against a coat closet, and then play the piano by itself. And so the total number of outputs in that show, I think, ended up being 42. But the point was, I needed a speaker outside each window, because there were 3 windows down the staircase, because I needed to hear the ghost move down the stairs. I needed a speaker behind the coat closet because I needed to hear the ghost behind the coat closet. I put a couple of MM4s inside the piano so that the ghost could play the piano. And so the number of channels, Dolby Atmos, Dolby 7.1, all the broadcast surround standards, the whole idea is I, the filmmaker, can't really know what's going to happen on the other end where my film is shown, or my movie, or my show, or my whatever it is that I make. So if we create a standard where the person on the other end can create something predictable, then I can aim for that, and I can know at least they're hearing roughly what I'm hearing when I make it. But in the theater, you are necessarily in the same room as your audience. And so necessarily the right answer is, well, what do I need here in this room for this play, for this audience, for this production?
I'd be interested, though, as you were working on the Zoom thing you were telling us about earlier. I mean, does the idea of a proscenium change in its value? Can the proscenium be moved by you as an artist to do things for an audience that you maybe can't do in a physical proscenium stage environment?
It's an appealing concept. And, Zoom limits us to stereo, right? So I had stereo. I had 2 outputs. That's what Zoom gave me. But I am really interested in that question, Bill. I think that we are at the beginning of the exploration of that. And I think once we get ourselves out of the idea that we're trying to just reproduce theater on Zoom and get into the idea of Zoom is a medium in which we can perform. Let us find out the merits of that medium for itself. Let us use theatrical terminology. Let us use theatrical history, theatrical mindset. But we're not producing theater. We're producing another thing that doesn't have a very good name yet. All the names sound catchwordy and stupid. But whatever it is, whether we don't have a name for it, whatever it is, has its own pluses and minuses, its own powers. And the more we aim for those directly, the better we're spending our time and our audience's time.
Plus, you're getting things like these new AirPods that do a virtual surround thing. So there's a lot of research into affordable solutions that allow you to immerse people in a 360-degree Atmos-like sound field. So it's going to be a fascinating number of coming years for theater, for movies, for everything, I think.
And we're only 50 years beyond theatrical sound design being an assistant master electrician dropping a needle on a record backstage, right? It's just 50 years. So
if it works, go with it.
But lighting design has been around for 200 years. Scenic design has been around for at least 3,500 years. Right, and so we're at the beginning of our exploration of these ideas. And as long as we give ourselves a little patience, I think we're going to find some very cool stuff to do with it.
Right. And in theory, Dolby Atmos allows us to put sounds between where the speakers are positioned, much as in a stereo position. I mean, Dolby Atmos allows us to describe that the sound is up there. Even if there's no speaker in that area, the sound will be spread then over the 4 speakers that are in that direction based on Dolby Atmos expressed out. And real quick on PanLab, is it something you use or?
Oh, sorry. Yes, PanLab. PanLab is very cool. I myself have not used it because it has not been out and stable since I've been in a physical theater to need to use it. I'm fascinated by it. I'm fascinated by it in a professional capacity as a sound designer, but I am also fascinated by it as a member of the QLab team in sort of using it as an example of something that people want to do with QLab. And
exactly,
yeah,
put it inside the program. Yeah, great. Thank you.
Let's cover our last question here. Roscoe Jones is in with Walter Murch designs the audio to the so the audience has three things they have to focus on at any one time. Do you have a thought on multiple cues interfering with each other in that context?
I think that if you distill the question of what is sound design for in the theater, if you distill it down to the simplest answer you can get, I really think that what it's for is for focusing attention. I think that when I am doing my job well, I can make sure the audience looks somewhere, feels some way, not a specific way, but a category of way, right? I would like the audience to feel tense. I would like the audience to feel upset. I would like the audience to feel calmed. I would like the audience to look upstage. I would like the audience to look downstage. That is the kind of thing that I think if we really just boil down sound design to its smallest piece, that's what it's for. So for me, I haven't heard Walter Murch speak about this, and I'm fascinated by it. For me, I think that again, the question of focus is sort of central. So I use multiple cues in order to combine those cues together to produce focus, rather than to give the audience several things to think about at once. I think generally speaking, in a live theater, the audience's attention needs to be directed more than in cinema. In cinema, it's easy to direct the audience's attention. Use a close-up, right? And now all you see is a face.
Exactly.
And I'm not saying that that's a weakness of film. I think that it's an incredible strength of film. And I'm saying that theater needs to work in order to sort of achieve that same level of focus direction. Obviously, the lighting designer is like, excuse me, I can do quite a lot of that, actually, if you just let me turn the other lights off, please. And yes, the most capable lighting designers are the ones who we don't even realize it, but suddenly we're like, wait a minute, it looks completely different than it did a minute ago. What's going on here? And then my move as a sound designer is like to back that play. Oh, you're going over there? I'm going to go over there with you. And if that means building up a sound world and then peeling it away in order to reveal the moment, that's one way, right? That's in fact one of my favorite moves. I did One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, in which the characters consistently talk about the oppressive experience of the hospital. And we made the oppressive experience of the hospital acoustic. The machinery of the hospital, the literal machinery of the hospital, the heating, and the plumbing was an ever-present acoustic element made of, it was 4 layers of sound that each grew and shrunk at various times until the chief ripped the piece of machinery out of the ground to throw through the window to facilitate the escape. And at the moment of him ripping that piece of machinery off, I cut the background sound, which had been playing for 2 hours, and the theater was quiet for the first time. And let me tell you about the audience's focus and how it was changed. That's what it did. And so for me, it's not so much about multiple cues, but it's about the total effect of multiple cues as a single thing and how that varies over time. That's a rambling answer, but
let's finish up. Schy has another point he wants to make.
Well, no, not a point. I'm just loving theater talk. I didn't realize I forgot I missed it. But to my question, with regards to Atmos and the 160, speaker experience, and you were talking about the different 5.1, 7.1, 8.1 surround sound concepts. Again, in live theater, we can do a lot of that cheating where physical sounds come from, behind the theater audience. And of course, that's now being tried in that Atmos experience. When you were talking about that oppressive acoustic, I love your verbiage, that oppressive acoustic, the building is a character in the emotional experience that the audience is now experiencing. What did you do? Did you just all 2 speakers out front, 1 speaker down below? Did you put speakers all around them?
You're talking specifically about Cuckoo's Nest?
Sure, why not?
Yeah. So I used a very, very small amount of rear fill and side speakers. Very, very little. If generally speaking, if you put a speaker behind someone and play sound out of it, they will turn and look. What's over there? Generally, and not always. And less in the cinema because people have been culturally trained that what's happening is up there on the screen. But in the theater, I think that thanks to some very inventive directors, starting in the middle of the last century, the audiences have been trained to believe that things might happen other places. And sometimes it's gimmicky, but most of the time I find it very enjoyable.
Well, gimmicky, I worked in a theme park and we would put speakers in the seats. And that would give you,
Cirque du Soleil does that to great effect as well in Love. But so I used only a very little bit of surround. Mostly I used relatively large speaker cabinets upstage of the upstage wall of the scenery. And the theater itself was relatively large. The theater space was large, the fly space was high, and the set occupied about the downstage third of the stage. So there was a lot of cavernous space behind the set that was not in use. And so I put speakers back there, which produced a very diffuse sound. It made it very difficult to identify exactly which direction something was coming from. And then the sound just sort of bled through the walls. I didn't look for ports to make sure sound came through. I did not try to find the perfect angle for these speakers. I was just like, yeah, lots of sound up there. And I'll make it sound as loud as it needs to, as soft as it needs to. I'll counter EQ it as I need to in order to have people sort of feel like, if I felt like if someone was sitting in the middle of the house and they were like, where is that coming from? Then I've done my job.
And you're getting a reverberance off of that brick that you would not get even, that's awesome.
Yeah, that's how I did it. And like I asked that the house soft goods, which ordinarily would be stored up in the flies, I asked that those be struck. Actually, I did not want any absorption up there. And I wanted to take control of I'll make sure it's not too loud. Don't suck any of that up. Let me have it.
Let the waves rattle.
Yeah. It was fun.
Real quick, as a former Jungle Cruise skipper, I have to tell you, Disney was doing surround sound in the 50s.
Oh, there you go. So we are at the end of our allotted time. I don't know, and it hurts me to say this, I don't know whether we have an after show today. This would be a perfect time because I know you've been incredibly engaging, Sam, and I have enjoyed this as much as probably any of the office hours that I've been a part of. So thank you for your expertise and for sharing and taking the time to do that. Also, thank you for working on something that a lot of people here are very excited about in QLab, in terms of the ability to help them get their jobs done well and functionally. And so you are welcome back, I'm sure, anytime you want to come, and I hope you will drop in. Benjamin had a last thought.
If I was to open up a 1080p post show, would folks join me?
Sure, why not? Put it in the chat here.
I
was hoping that Guy would be here because Guy usually opens up a room, but if you want to do one, I don't have any objection to that, and I don't think Alex would either. This has been so engaging that I think people do want to chat afterwards. So
I would love to chat.
Look in the Makana chat. If Benjamin puts a link there, we can support that and go to it. And
in Makana.
In Mukana, right, in the Mukana chat links. Again, I think that takes care of us today. Thank you one and all for being here. We've kept more than 100 people here for the entire show, even though we've gone well over, which speaks to how interested people were in this subject and how well you did in keeping us around, Sam. Thank you. All right, we'll see you all tomorrow, same time, office hours, same place. Goodbye. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other.